been told your thoughts are the problem, that you need to think positive, calm down, just breathe. But if that really worked, why does your mind still race at night? Why do you feel like you're sinking beneath waves of worry that never stop? Why do you wake up tired, even after sleeping? They lied. The world taught you to chase peace by fixing everything out there: the job, the money, the body, the relationship. But no one told you the real reason you suffer. It's the clinging to control, to identity, to fear, to the stories in your head that never stop repeating. Buddhism understood this over 2,000 years ago, that your anxiety isn't caused by life itself, but by how tightly you hold on to what you think life should be. And the most powerful medicine isn't more thinking, it's understanding emptiness, not the kind of emptiness that makes life meaningless, but the emptiness that sets you free, that shows you your thoughts are not facts, your fear is not truth, and peace isn't something you chase. It's what's left when you let go. Tonight, as you listen, something will shift. Your shoulders will relax. The storm in your chest will start to pass, and you'll feel something rare. Space. Space between you and the thoughts. Space to breathe, to rest, to just be. And when you wake up tomorrow, your problems might still be there, but you will be different. Still, clear, unmoved. A quiet mind in a loud world. This isn't just another audio, it's a doorway, a reset, a return to yourself. Are you ready to let go? Let's begin. You've made it here because you're looking for something deeper than a quick fix. You're tired of carrying the constant weight of self-judgment, the voice in your head that criticizes even the smallest mistake, that turns silence into shame and effort into never enough. That voice has been with you so long, you might think it is you. But it's not. And you're about to learn how to let it go. There is a path that doesn't involve fighting your thoughts or pretending to be okay. It's quiet, it's gentle, and it's powerful. It's called Metta Bhavana, loving kindness meditation. And once you understand how it works, something will begin to shift inside you, not with force, not with control, but with deep, quiet compassion, the kind you've been needing for years without knowing how to give it to yourself. In most people's minds, meditation seems like something peaceful and perfect. But if you've ever sat in silence, you know it isn't always that way. What rises up first is usually not peace, but pain, regret, insecurity, guilt. The inner critic rushes in, convinced it needs to speak first. And it's loud. But loving kindness doesn't try to argue with that voice. It doesn't debate or resist. It simply speaks a different language, one of care, of warmth, of acceptance. This practice trains your mind to respond to pain the way a loving friend would. And slowly, that cruel, cold voice begins to lose its power. It starts with a phrase, a whisper in your mind, not of shame, but of kindness. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. At first, these words might feel foreign, maybe even fake. You might say them with tightness in your chest, with doubt, even with anger. But that's okay. Metta doesn't require you to believe the words. It only asks you to keep saying them gently, over and over, because the act of speaking kindly to yourself is already healing, even if you can't feel it yet. Think of it like tending to a wound. You don't need to believe the bandage will work. You only need to apply it and give it time. These phrases are the bandage for the invisible wounds you've carried for far too long. Now, let's understand the critic. It often sounds like protection, like it's trying to prevent failure or embarrassment, but underneath its sharpness is fear. Fear of not being good enough, of being left behind, of being unlovable. The inner critic is loud because it believes that by being hard on you, it can keep you safe. But you don't need that kind of safety anymore. You need softness. You need care. You need a new voice, one that says, "I see you're trying. That's enough." This is what Metta Bhavana teaches. Not self-improvement, but self-acceptance. Not fixing, but holding. Start by sitting with your eyes closed and your breath soft. Place your hand on your heart if that feels okay. Begin to say the phrases slowly. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. Say them gently, even if they feel hollow. Each time you speak them, you are planting seeds. Some part of your mind is listening, and though you may not notice it today, the soil is shifting. There is no need to force emotion. Loving kindness doesn't require you to feel love immediately. It only asks for the intention, the willingness to care even a little. You may feel resistance. You may hear the critic saying, "This is pointless. You don't deserve this. Who are you to wish yourself happiness?" But that's the very reason to continue, because that voice has ruled for too long. Over time, something else begins to emerge. You notice small changes, a softer edge to your thoughts, a pause before judgment, a sense that you are no longer at war with yourself. This is not magic. It's practice, and this practice deepens. Once you've spent time offering these phrases to yourself, the circle of care begins to expand, not because you're trying to be good, but because compassion, once awakened, naturally spreads. You begin to say the phrases for someone you love. May they be safe. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they live with ease. Then someone neutral. Then someone difficult. Not to forgive their harm, but to stop holding it. To stop letting pain multiply in your own mind. But it starts, and must start, with you. Metta is especially powerful for those of us who grew up in homes where love was conditional, where affection was earned, where perfection was praised, but vulnerability was punished. That environment trains the inner critic to thrive. It teaches us that kindness is a reward, not a right. Loving kindness meditation retrains that response. It gives you the kindness you needed back then, right now. Not through memory, but through repetition. Through the daily act of reminding your nervous system, you are safe, you are enough. And this changes how you move through the world. You stop needing other people to give you what you can finally give to yourself. You become less reactive, less desperate for approval, less terrified of mistakes. Not because the fear is gone, but because you've learned how to meet it with compassion instead of punishment. That doesn't mean the critic vanishes overnight. It will return during stress, failure, uncertainty. But each time, you'll have a new response. Instead of collapsing into shame, you'll breathe. You'll return to the phrases, and you'll remember, this voice is old. This pain is not the truth. You'll realize that the critic is just a sound, a reflex, and you are not required to obey it. Many people ask if Metta Bhavana is selfish. They wonder, how can I wish happiness for myself when the world is hurting? But here's the truth. Only those who care for themselves can truly care for others without resentment or burnout. Loving kindness begins with you, so it can move through you. You will notice this when someone disappoints you and you no longer take it so personally. When someone criticizes you and you don't crumble. When you fail at something and instead of spiraling, you say, "That was hard, and I'm still worthy." These are not small shifts. They are signs of inner freedom. In this practice, consistency matters more than intensity. 10 minutes a day is enough. You don't need candles or silence or perfection. You just need a willingness to be with yourself as you are. On some days, the words will feel warm and comforting. On others, they'll feel flat or frustrating. Keep going. The critic has had years of practice, so give yourself permission to keep practicing too. Eventually, the voice inside you changes. It becomes more like a companion than a judge. A voice that says, "You're doing your best." A voice that rests beside you when you're in pain instead of blaming you for it. This is not wishful thinking. It's the result of rewiring your attention, your emotions, and your beliefs, all through the repetition of a simple, quiet wish. There are deeper layers too. As you continue, you begin to notice the difference between your true awareness and your conditioned mind. The critic is part of the conditioned mind, built from years of judgment, culture, media, and fear. But beneath that, there's something untouched, something aware, present, calm. Metta helps you connect to that part of you, not to escape pain, but to be with it without collapsing, without clinging, without needing it to go away before you can be okay. You'll start to feel the space between the thought and the truth, between the feeling and your identity. You'll notice the critics say, "You're a failure," and you'll respond with, "That's a thought, not a fact." And that space is freedom, not dramatic, not loud, but steady, real. Over time, you begin to realize that self-compassion isn't weakness, it's resilience. The ability to sit with your own pain without turning it into a weapon, to face yourself honestly and still say, "May I be free from suffering." Not because you're perfect, but because you're human. And perhaps the most beautiful effect of all, when others are hurting, you'll be able to stay present. Because you've practiced staying present with your own suffering, you've built that muscle. And now, when someone else is drowning in their critic, you'll be the one who says, "It's okay, you're still worthy." All because you learned how to say that to yourself. This is the quiet power of loving kindness. It doesn't need noise, it doesn't need proof. It doesn't wait for you to fix your life first. It begins now, exactly as you are, with a breath, with a whisper. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. And maybe for the first time in your life, the voice that answers back is kind. And slowly, the voice softens, not just for a moment, but in the spaces where self-judgment used to live. Something opens. You don't rush to blame yourself anymore. You pause, you breathe, you respond instead of react. This shift isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle, but it's real. Now, a deeper understanding begins to form. As your heart grows quieter, your mind begins to reveal its patterns more clearly. What you once thought were random moments of stress, distraction, or inner chaos begin to show themselves as something far more structured. The Buddha called them the 5 hindrances, and when you learn to see them clearly, the confusion in your mind starts to lose its grip. Every moment of anxiety you've felt, every restless day, every foggy night spent overthinking or shutting down, they all fall into these 5 categories. These aren't abstract ideas. They're deeply human experiences, ancient names, but modern truths. If you've ever wanted a map of your mental landscape, this is it. Not just a list of problems, but a pathway through them. The first hindrance is sensual desire. At first, it doesn't sound like a problem. The world even encourages it. More pleasure, more comfort, more escape. But this isn't about healthy joy. It's about craving. The endless reaching towards something that promises peace, but never delivers. When anxiety arises, the mind often grabs onto something. Food, scrolling, planning, shopping, fantasizing. The relief is short. The tension always returns. Sensual desire in this context is the constant movement of mind toward, what if I just had this? The nervous system believes pleasure will end discomfort, but it only hides it temporarily. The deeper issue isn't pleasure, it's attachment. It's the belief that satisfaction is always one step away, so the mind never rests. It seeks, then seeks more. When you recognize this craving in the body, the leaning forward, the tightness in the jaw, the urgent hunger for something, you interrupt the cycle. You turn toward it, gently, and acknowledge it. Ah, this is wanting. This is the hunger for escape. The craving doesn't vanish, but it loses its illusion. And without illusion, it holds no power. You return to presence, not with force, but with understanding. The second hindrance is ill will. This one disguises itself cleverly. It wears the mask of justice, of sharp thinking, even of self-protection. But underneath, it is the slow poison of aversion, a pushing away of what is. It can sound like anger, but it also speaks in subtle tones, irritation, resentment, harshness. Toward others, yes, but most often toward yourself. Anxiety often hides in ill will, the tension of not wanting to feel what's present, the desperate attempt to fight reality. You tell yourself, I shouldn't be feeling this, and the conflict grows. You turn away from discomfort, and in doing so, you give it strength. Aversion does not remove pain, it doubles it. The path through this hindrance is not pretending to like what hurts, it's softening the pushback. It's acknowledging pain without adding rejection. This is difficult. I'm not failing for feeling this. I can stay with it. When the heart opens to discomfort, not with agreement but with compassion, ill will weakens. Not overnight, but breath by breath, reaction by response. You start to see that anger is often sadness with armor. That frustration is fear that hasn't been held, and slowly the heat cools. The third hindrance is sloth and torpor, often misunderstood as laziness, but it's something deeper. It's heaviness of mind, numbness, the fog that settles in when life feels too much. In anxiety, this shows up as shutdown, the retreat into scrolling, sleep, disconnection, not out of rest, but out of escape. The body may be still, but the mind is drowning. It feels like emptiness, but it's actually a form of suffering. The danger here is subtle, because the world often praises stillness. But not all stillness is peace. Some of it is paralysis. When sloth takes over, there's a forgetting of life, a shrinking back from effort, from care, from wakefulness. The path through this is not pushing harder. It's lighting a small inner flame. It's noticing gently the moment of collapse, naming it without shame. This is withdrawal. This is the mind trying to protect me by numbing out. You respond not with pressure, but with presence. A small movement, a breath, opening the window, standing in the sun. Just enough light to break the spell. Torpor fades not through shame, but through reawakening the senses, through remembering that you are still here and still capable of meeting the next moment with care. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. This one is loud. It speaks fast. It thinks in spirals. It makes lists, then rewrites them. It checks, then checks again. It pretends to be solving problems, but underneath it is panic in disguise. In modern life, this hindrance is everywhere, in constant notifications, in productivity pressure, in the way we glorify busyness. But beneath it all, there is fear, the fear of stopping. Restlessness rises when silence begins. It fills stillness with noise. It avoids presence by creating movement, mental or physical. The body gets tight, the breath shortens, the mind runs. And what's underneath is often a sense of being unsafe in stillness. The solution is not control, it's curiosity. You begin to ask, what am I running from? What would I feel if I stopped? That question opens the door. Worry is a habit, not a helper. It feels productive, but it rarely resolves anything. It just burns energy. You interrupt it by anchoring the mind in sensation. Feet on the floor, air on the skin, sound in the room. You return to the simplicity of the moment, not because it's exciting, but because it's real. And realness is where safety begins. The fifth hindrance is doubt. The most dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it sounds so reasonable. Doubt questions everything, including the path itself. It whispers, is this really helping? What if you're wasting time? What if nothing works? Doubt is not the same as curiosity. Curiosity is open. Doubt is paralyzing. This hindrance attacks your confidence, your worth, your capacity. It makes you second-guess your efforts. It breeds hesitation. In anxiety, it often shows up as indecision, endless research, fear of choosing wrong, fear of trusting your experience. Doubt doesn't offer insight. It offers paralysis dressed up as intelligence. To meet this hindrance, you must respond not with argument, but with steadiness. You name the doubt. You don't get pulled into its stories. You say, this is the voice of uncertainty. It is not the end of the path. It is part of the path. You come back to what's real. Breath, body, ground, not to fix doubt, but to move beside it, to walk forward, even when the voice says, are you sure? That is strength, not being certain, but moving anyway, with presence. All 5 hindrances are not enemies. They are teachers. They arise in every mind. They are not proof of failure. They are invitations to wake up, to notice, to return, not once, but 1,000 times. Each return builds strength. Each return makes the mind clearer. The Buddha never promised a life free from struggle. He offered a path through it, a path of seeing clearly, meeting gently and choosing wisely. The 5 hindrances are not random. They are precise. They show you exactly where you are stuck and how to unstick yourself. When you understand sensual desire, you stop chasing what never satisfies. When you understand ill will, you stop fighting what's already here. When you understand sloth, you remember your own spark. When you understand restlessness, you rediscover stillness. When you understand doubt, you reclaim your trust. And none of this is theory. It's practice. Each time you sit, breathe, and watch your mind, you are learning. You are seeing these patterns in real time, and through that seeing, you gain freedom, not by force, but by clarity. This is how anxiety begins to lose its grip, not by being fixed, but by being fully understood. Anxiety is not your enemy. It's your nervous system trying to protect you in ways it doesn't yet know how to stop. The hindrances give you a language for what's happening. They shine a light on the patterns, and once you see clearly, you are no longer trapped. This is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming aware. And awareness is what transforms everything. When you can meet your craving with compassion, your anger with understanding, your fatigue with curiosity, your restlessness with grounding, and your doubt with patience, something shifts. You stop being overwhelmed by the mind and you start to care for it. This is the beginning of true healing, not escaping your thoughts, but holding them gently, watching them rise and knowing you don't have to follow, watching them fall and knowing you are still whole. The path is here, in the body, in the breath, in this exact moment. And with every hindrance that arises, there is an equal opportunity to return. That is the real power, not never falling, but learning how to rise again and again with kindness, with clarity, with the steady heart of someone who has stopped running. You are not broken for struggling, you are human for feeling, and you are free the moment you stop believing everything your mind says. The hindrances will visit. Let them come, let them go, and in their coming and going, you'll discover what was never hindered: your calm, your clarity, your courage to begin again. And so, the mind becomes clearer. The shadows that once seemed overwhelming are now seen for what they are: habits, not truths. The 5 hindrances no longer control from the dark. You've seen their patterns, you've named them, and that is how they begin to dissolve. But even after that clarity, pain still comes. Thoughts still bite. Old stories still replay. The past doesn't disappear. And in those moments, it's easy to fall back, to resist, to wish the pain away. But there's another way, one that doesn't fight or flee, one that doesn't push the pain down, but meets it fully. This next teaching isn't soft. It's not comfortable. But it's one of the most powerful teachings the Buddha ever gave. And it holds the key to a deeper kind of peace. This teaching is known as the simile of the saw. The Buddha once told his monks, even if bandits were to capture you and saw through your limbs with a 2-handled saw, if you gave rise to anger even then, you would not be following my teaching. It wasn't a metaphor meant to shock. It was meant to wake something up. A truth that most of us never get taught. True freedom isn't found in controlling what happens to you. It's found in not letting it control your heart. Mental suffering often feels like being attacked from within. not by others, but by thoughts, by memories, by the echo of voices that said you weren't enough. The cutting doesn't come from outside, it comes from inside the mind, and every time we retaliate against our own pain, we make the wound deeper. The simile of the saw is not about being passive, it's not about tolerating harm, it's about recognizing the most important choice we have, not whether suffering arises, but whether we turn it into more suffering. When we meet pain with resistance, we feed it. When we meet it with hatred, we let it shape us. But when we meet it with radical acceptance, we break the cycle. Acceptance doesn't mean approval, it doesn't mean giving up. It means this. Right now, this is what's here. I don't have to like it, but I will not add to it. That is strength. That is power. And it's a skill you can train, one moment at a time. Mental pain takes many forms. Sometimes it's a voice that says you're a failure. Sometimes it's a surge of shame after a small mistake. Sometimes it's grief that never got to finish. These experiences cut deep, and the reflex is to fight, to shut them down, argue with them, distract yourself, escape. But the fight keeps the wound open. When pain arises, the first step is to pause, to notice what the mind is doing. Is it attacking? Is it defending? Is it trying to numb out? That pause is not weakness, it's awareness, and awareness is what creates choice. In that space, you begin to notice that the pain is not personal. It may feel personal. It may wear your voice, your memories, your history, but it is not who you are. It is something arising in awareness. It is a wave. You are the ocean. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not pretending things are okay when they're not. This is meeting what's true without letting it steal your peace. Sometimes, mental suffering comes as repeated thoughts, over and over, the same sentence, the same fear, the same regret. Like a saw going back and forth, each time it returns, it stings. You start to believe the only solution is to silence it. But thought suppression never works. It just moves the pain into deeper layers of the mind. The simile of the saw offers a different approach. Let the thought come, let the pain rise, but do not let it take your kindness with it. This might sound impossible, but it is something that becomes real through practice. When the thought arises, I'm worthless, I'll never be enough, no one cares, you don't argue with it, you don't run. You say, this is pain, this is suffering, but I do not have to add hatred to it. You breathe, you soften the body, you let the thought pass through like a cloud passing through an open sky, and you hold the space around it with compassion. One of the greatest misunderstandings about radical acceptance is that it means doing nothing. That couldn't be further from the truth. It is one of the most active, courageous things you can do. It means choosing not to attack yourself when you're already hurting. It means choosing not to turn pain into poison. The mind might say, but I can't accept this. Even that is okay. You can accept the resistance. Acceptance includes everything, even the parts of you that resist. In this practice, there's no pressure to do it perfectly. There's no rule that says you must feel peace. The invitation is to stop escalating, to stop adding the second layer of suffering, the shame, the guilt, the inner violence. The pain may still be there, but you are no longer fueling it. This teaching also helps with how we treat others. When someone lashes out, when someone speaks from their own pain, we often feel the urge to retaliate, to correct them, to defend ourselves. But just like with our own thoughts, this only deepens the suffering. Non-retaliation is not about weakness. It's about refusing to let someone else's pain decide your response. When you respond with presence instead of reactivity, you change the pattern. You stop the cycle from passing through you into someone else. You become a mirror that reflects wisdom instead of war. This doesn't mean staying in harmful situations. It doesn't mean staying silent when boundaries are crossed. It means you speak with clarity, not vengeance. You act with wisdom, not rage. You protect with strength, not with cruelty. And the same applies to your relationship with yourself. Every time a painful memory returns, you have this choice: to attack yourself or to hold yourself, to believe the story or to see the pain beneath it, to become the voice of suffering or to become the space that allows healing. That space, the one that sees without judgment, is what mindfulness cultivates. It is what every breath brings you closer to, and over time, that space becomes your home. The mind may still move, pain may still come, but you are no longer caught inside it. You are aware. You are steady. This is not detachment. This is not coldness. This is warmth that doesn't need to prove itself. A quiet strength that refuses to add harm where there's already pain. One of the most beautiful effects of this practice is that it changes the inner dialogue. The mind that once punished you for feeling becomes the mind that comforts. The part of you that once screamed now speaks gently. The inner war fades, not because life became easier, but because you stopped adding weapons to the battlefield. This teaching, if practiced, can change how you experience everything: grief, fear, anger, failure. It becomes less about escaping pain and more about relating to it in a new way, not as an enemy, not as a test, but as something that can be met, held, and allowed to pass. Radical acceptance is not giving in. It's giving up the fantasy that things must be different before you can be okay. It's the power to say, even this belongs. Even now, I can be kind. You'll notice this most during difficult moments. When the mind wants to tighten, you breathe. When judgment rises, you soften. When the old story returns, you don't chase it. You recognize it, bow to it, and let it move through. Sometimes this practice feels like doing nothing, but it is doing the most important thing of all, refusing to become the pain that visits you. You are not your worst thoughts. You are the one who sees them, who breathes with them, who doesn't collapse into them. That awareness is where freedom lives. Not far away, not in a perfect version of you, but here, in the quiet strength of your own heart. The Buddha's simile wasn't about physical violence. It was about how we meet life. Life will cut, thoughts will sting, people will misunderstand, but your mind does not have to burn. There is a kind of peace that is unshakable, not because it avoids life, but because it embraces life fully. And that peace begins every time you choose presence over punishment. This is not a one-time decision. It is a path, a practice, and each moment you choose it, something inside you changes. You become the kind of person who doesn't turn away from pain, your own or anyone else's. Not because you enjoy it, but because you know you can face it. This is what it means to walk the middle path, to stay close to what hurts without turning it into harm, to hold yourself through the storm, to say, without words, I am still here, I will not run, I will not fight, I will stay. And in that staying, you discover something the pain could never touch: stillness, courage, compassion that does not shake. And from that place, the next moment arrives, not as a problem to fix, but as a part of life to meet with open eyes and a steady heart. This is the way, not away from suffering, but through it. Not by fighting it, but by no longer letting it define you. And the more you walk this path, the more you remember. You were never broken, only waiting to come home. And then there is a silence deeper than quiet, the kind that doesn't come from shutting out the world, but from no longer reacting to it. You feel it after you've stopped resisting your own pain, after you've chosen not to fight the thoughts that once ruled you. That inner stillness doesn't need conditions. It doesn't depend on fixing or changing anything. It simply reveals itself when the inner storm settles. But how do you stay there? How do you remain grounded when life starts moving again? How do you keep the calm without gripping it, without turning peace into another goal? The answer is more intimate than any belief and more immediate than any philosophy. It begins with the breath, not the one you control, but the one that's always been breathing you. There is a practice, simple on the surface, yet endlessly deep. Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. It's not about deep breathing or making your breath perfect. It's not about forcing your mind to be still. This is the subtle art of letting the breath breathe itself, and you learning how to be with it, just as it is. In a world that teaches control as safety, Anapanasati is a return to trust, a return to the body, a return to the present without needing to shape it. When you sit and bring attention to the breath, the mind usually does something immediately. It tries to adjust the breath, fix it, make it better. The practice begins by noticing that impulse, the need to interfere, and then choosing to step back, letting the body do what it already knows how to do, breathing. The breath doesn't need your help, but your attention, gentle, non-controlling, brings you into harmony with something more stable than thought. Thoughts jump. Breath stays. Thoughts spin stories. Breath stays neutral. It rises and falls like the tide, like the wind through trees. Each cycle is a reminder. Life moves on its own. At first, this may feel boring. The mind wants stimulation. It wants progress. But boredom is just resistance in disguise, a discomfort with stillness. Staying with the breath teaches the mind a new way of relating, not through chasing or fixing, but through allowing. And allowing is where peace grows. Each breath is slightly different. Some are short, some are long, some feel full, others barely register. The practice is not about making them equal, it's about noticing without judgment. When you become the witness instead of the controller, the breath begins to show you things, your state of mind, the tension in the body, the quality of your presence. The breath becomes a mirror. When attention is settled on the breath, the nervous system begins to shift. The body relaxes, muscles let go, the heart rate slows. And this isn't a forced calm, it's the natural result of meeting experience without adding pressure. The more gently you stay with the breath, the more the mind learns safety in stillness. Distraction will happen. That's not a mistake. The key is how you return, not with frustration, not with judgment, but with the same softness the breath offers. You notice you've wandered and you come back. That return is the practice. That kindness is what changes the brain. Every time you return, you teach your mind that peace is always available, not by arriving somewhere new, but by returning to what was never lost. As this continues, the breath begins to deepen on its own, not because you made it, but because tension fades when attention is gentle. The breath moves in and out like a wave, and slowly you begin to experience it not just in the nose or chest, but through the whole body. A full body breathing, aliveness from crown to toes. The body no longer feels separate. It becomes unified. At this stage, effort changes. You no longer chase the breath. You rest in it. You no longer focus tightly. You soften into awareness. It's like floating instead of swimming. And this shift from doing to being is where equanimity starts to grow. Not the numb kind, but the kind that doesn't cling to pleasant or run from unpleasant. A balance that can hold joy and sadness in the same breath. Anapanasati is not about becoming blank. It's about becoming clear. You start to see how thought arises and fades, how emotion moves like weather, how everything comes and goes, but awareness stays. The breath is your anchor, not to trap you, but to keep you from drifting into old patterns. This practice is also a training in patience. The mind wants results. It wants to measure progress, but breath doesn't care about progress. It teaches presence, not performance. Some days, attention will be stable. Other days, it will scatter. Both are part of the journey. The breath teaches you to meet yourself as you are, not as you wish to be. When you stay with the breath long enough, something unexpected happens. You begin to sense that the breath is not something you are doing. It's just happening. You're not breathing. You're being breathed. Life is moving through you. This realization is small on the surface, but profound in effect. It loosens the grip of ego. The sense of being the controller softens. There's no need to force anything. There's just awareness and breath and stillness. In this space, the mind begins to let go of chasing. You don't need to fix every thought. You don't need to change every emotion. You don't need to solve your whole life in one sitting. You just return, again and again. And with each return, the depth of presence grows. Eventually, the breath becomes so subtle, it barely feels like anything is happening. But awareness stays. This is not dullness. This is clarity without content. A quiet mind that is not shut down, but wide open. In this stillness, insight can arise, not forced, not searched for, but revealed. You begin to understand things not with logic, but with direct seeing. The nature of impermanence, the nature of self, the nature of peace. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this practice is how it begins to shape daily life. You notice your breath while walking, while speaking, while waiting. It becomes a friend, a reminder. When anger stirs, you breathe. When fear rises, you return. When joy arrives, you stay. The breath is always there, steady, quiet, offering a way back. Anapanasati also opens the door to deep emotional healing. When grief surfaces, the breath is a place to rest. When shame rises, the breath is a space that doesn't judge. The breath holds all of you. It doesn't require you to be calm to return to it. It meets you where you are, every time. There's no finish line here, no final breath that completes the journey. It is a path of deepening, not arriving, and every moment is a new beginning, a new chance to stay, to soften, to open. Some teachings say that watching the breath leads to joy, then tranquility, then stillness, then insight. But these are not steps to chase. They are experiences that unfold naturally when effort dissolves, when control softens into trust, when attention becomes gentle enough to hold even the subtlest experience without fear. This is what the breath teaches. Not just how to be calm, but how to be free. Free from the need to escape the moment. Free from the belief that peace is somewhere else. Free from the habit of pushing, pulling, grasping. When you let the breath breathe you, you stop trying to manage life. You begin to experience it directly, without filters, without resistance. Just the rise, the fall, the quiet space in between. In that space, something timeless opens, a stillness that doesn't belong to you, but includes you. A peace that cannot be owned, but can be lived. And in that peace, you remember who you are beneath all the stories. Aware, present, unshaken. No thought can give you this. No achievement can match this. It is the gift that breath brings every moment, if you're willing to stop reaching and simply receive. This is the subtle art, the great undoing. Not doing more, but doing less, until only presence remains, and in that presence there is nothing missing, nothing to fix, only this breath and the next. And it is enough. And so the breath becomes home, a place where nothing needs to be added or removed, where presence lives without needing perfection, where stillness no longer feels like emptiness, but something full and deeply alive. But beneath that calm surface, something subtle remains, a tension that's harder to name. Even when the body is relaxed and the breath flows easily, there is often a hidden pull, a sense of self needing to defend, compare, protect, or prove something. This layer doesn't always speak loudly. It sits in the background. It shapes thoughts and colors emotions. It drives anxiety in ways that feel normal, yet deeply unsettling. This is where the teachings on the fetters begin to make sense. The fetters, according to the Buddha, are not chains around your feet. They're the inner bonds that keep the mind tied to suffering. They're not physical, but their impact is real. They influence how you see yourself, how you relate to the world, and how you respond to the unknown. Understanding them doesn't just explain your anxiety. It shows you how to release it at the root. The first is the belief in a fixed self. This isn't just philosophical. It affects how you respond to failure, to rejection, to uncertainty. When you hold tightly to an idea of who you are, smart, successful, strong, spiritual, anything that threatens that identity becomes a source of fear. Even small setbacks feel personal. Thoughts like, "I should be beyond this," or "this isn't me," come from the illusion that you are a solid, unchanging thing. But when that belief softens, experience becomes lighter. pain is still pain, but it's no longer yours. It's just what's passing through. The second is doubt. Not the open curiosity kind, but the paralyzing kind. The kind that tells you to stop trying, that whispers you're not doing it right, that questions the practice, the path, your own worth. This isn't healthy skepticism. It's the mind trying to stay in control by never committing. Doubt creates anxiety by feeding endless loops of uncertainty. It keeps the heart half closed. The way through is not to argue with doubt, but to move anyway, to practice even when unsure, to stay when the mind says flee. Trust isn't a feeling, it's a direction. Next is attachment to rites and rituals. This doesn't mean ceremonies are bad. It points to the mind's habit of thinking peace can only come from doing things a certain way. It's the voice that says, "I didn't meditate perfectly today, so it doesn't count," or "I missed a day, now I've failed." This attachment turns practice into pressure. It turns freedom into performance. But liberation doesn't depend on appearances. It depends on how fully you meet the present. Letting go of this attachment allows practice to become something lived, not performed, something honest, not rigid. As the path deepens, subtler fetters arise. There is craving, not just for things, but for experiences. Craving for peace, for bliss, for certainty. The mind tries to recreate the last moment of stillness, and in doing so, leaves the present. This type of craving hides beneath spiritual effort. It's wanting the fruits of practice while resisting the patience it requires. The way out isn't through suppression. It's through seeing how craving adds weight to everything. When the craving is seen clearly, the grasping loosens. The heart remembers how to rest. Alongside craving is aversion, the rejection of discomfort. This can take the form of irritability, judgment, or subtle tightening when something unpleasant arises. It's the mental habit of pushing away anything that doesn't match your idea of peace. But peace that depends on conditions isn't peace. True freedom includes the whole range of experience. When aversion is met with kindness, it starts to lose its force. It no longer needs to be believed. It can be noticed, held, and allowed to pass without punishment. There is also the attachment to form, the subtle clinging to meditation experiences, identities, and even insights. This shows up as pride in progress or fear of losing what's been gained. It's the feeling of, "I've reached something, I must protect it." But anything that needs defending is not stable. True understanding doesn't cling. It lets things arise and pass without ownership. Releasing attachment to form doesn't mean abandoning practice. It means practicing without ego, without needing proof. Further along the path comes restlessness, not just the obvious fidgeting, but deep unease, the sense that something still isn't right, that you haven't done enough, that you're missing something. This restlessness fuels endless seeking. It makes silence uncomfortable and movement addictive. But when you stop chasing, restlessness reveals its root, the discomfort with simply being. By staying present through it, the urgency fades, the body softens, awareness expands, and restlessness, once seen, becomes stillness. Then comes conceit, not arrogance, but comparison, the constant measuring of yourself against others. Am I ahead or behind? Am I more awakened or less? This mindset keeps you separate. It feeds anxiety by turning life into a competition. Even spiritual practice becomes a race. But the path is not linear. It's personal, intimate, alive. There's nothing to win, nothing to prove. When you drop comparison, connection returns with others, with the moment, with your own heart. Next is the subtle craving for existence, wanting to be someone, somewhere, something. It's the belief that fulfillment lies in becoming, in being seen, known, valued. This craving hides in goals, dreams, even good intentions. It keeps the future always slightly more important than the now. But peace isn't found in becoming. It's found in being. Letting go of this craving doesn't mean apathy. It means releasing the belief that your worth depends on achievement. Finally, there is the craving for non-existence, the wish to disappear, to escape. In anxiety, this often appears as shutdown, avoidance, even despair. It's the thought that if I could just stop existing for a while, the pain would go away. This isn't weakness. It's suffering that hasn't found a way to speak. The way through isn't in suppressing this feeling, but in listening to it with deep compassion. To let it be heard, not followed. Healing begins not by erasing the pain, but by refusing to believe it means you're broken. The fetters are not foreign. They are familiar. They shape the internal world of almost every anxious thought, every rigid belief, every attempt to fix what was never wrong. They keep you spinning in patterns that feel like safety, but are really avoidance. Understanding them brings clarity. Seeing how they work gives you space. And that space is where freedom lives. What's powerful about this teaching is that it's not just a theory. It's a map. A way to name what's been confusing. A way to recognize that what you're feeling is part of a shared human struggle. That your anxiety is not a personal failure, but a universal experience seen clearly by the Buddha thousands of years ago. And just as the fetters are shared, so is the path that frees you from them. Each moment of mindfulness loosens their grip. Every time you return to presence instead of spiraling into thought, one strand weakens. Every breath taken without judgment, every feeling met without reaction, every day lived without the need to prove anything. It all adds up. This is not perfection. It's process. It's not sudden. It's gradual, but it's real. And with every step, identity becomes lighter. Fear becomes less defining. The self becomes less of a cage. Not because it's erased, but because it's no longer clung to. You stop needing to be a fixed thing. You become more like the breath, present, changing, free. This freedom doesn't mean you no longer feel. It means you no longer fight your feelings. You allow experience to rise and fall. You allow joy without needing to hold it. You allow pain without needing to fix it. You meet life with a heart that is steady, open, awake. And as each fetter breaks, the mind becomes more quiet. Not because nothing's happening, but because nothing needs to be controlled. The anxiety that once felt like a storm becomes a passing wind. The fear that once felt like identity becomes a signal, seen, understood, not obeyed. This is what liberation means. Not floating above life, but meeting life without clinging. Walking with presence, breathing without fear, being without needing to become. And it all begins here, not in some distant future, but in the willingness to see clearly, to let go slowly, and to live gently. There is no rush. There is no race. There is only now. And in now, you are already enough. Already on the path. Already unfolding. Breath by breath. Fetter by fetter. Thought by thought. Unbound. And when the mind loosens its grip on identity, when you are no longer shaped by the urge to be someone or to disappear completely, something else rises from the silence. You start to see clearly how temporary everything truly is. Not just the thoughts and emotions, but the body, the people around you, your roles, your stories, all of it. This isn't a sad realization, it's a doorway. The things you clung to so tightly begin to feel lighter. You see that fear was rooted not just in needing control, but in denying one simple fact. Everything changes, and one day everything ends. And yet, this ending is not a punishment. It's a teacher. Perhaps the most honest one we'll ever meet. Buddhist cemetery contemplations, known as Maranasati practices, were not created to disturb or shock. They weren't meant to make life feel bleak or empty. They were designed to wake the heart. To point directly at the truth that most of us quietly avoid every day, that we are going to die, that everyone we know will die, that this life, in all its intensity and noise, will pass, not someday, but definitely. And this truth, when turned toward with full attention, holds a strange kind of peace. Anxiety feeds on the illusion of control. It loops around what might happen, what must be prevented, what should be held together. But death is the ultimate end to control, and because of that, death contemplation breaks the illusion. It doesn't take your fear and try to comfort it. It walks straight into fear's house and turns on the light. In early Buddhist tradition, monks were instructed to meditate in charnel grounds, places where the dead were placed in the open air. They would sit with corpses in various stages of decay, not as an act of morbid fascination, but to study the truth of impermanence directly, to see clearly what the body becomes, and to understand this, too, is what I will become. Each stage was contemplated: the bloated body, the discolored skin, the body picked apart by animals, the bones scattered, the bones bleached by the sun, the bones turning to dust. And the phrase they repeated was, "This body of mine is of the same nature. It will be like that. It cannot escape it." Not in despair, but with clarity. This practice was not only about death, it was about seeing through delusion. The delusion that the body will always serve you, that youth is permanent, that health is guaranteed. When you see through this, priorities shift. You stop wasting time on shallow things. You speak more honestly. You let go of comparisons. You live more fully, not in denial of death, but because of it. Anxiety often arises from fear of loss. But when you accept that loss is already built into the nature of things, the mind starts to let go. Not in numbness, not in hopelessness, in freedom. When you no longer expect life to give you permanence, you stop suffering when it doesn't. Cemetery contemplation helps soften the grip on self-image, the endless tension to look a certain way, maintain appearances, preserve status. When you realize this body will rot and vanish, the need to impress loses power. It's not about giving up on care or dignity. It's about shifting your attention to what truly matters: connection, honesty, presence. Some people fear that thinking about death will lead to anxiety, but running from death quietly feeds it. Death doesn't cause fear, denial does. When you bring death into awareness gently, something unexpected happens. The mind begins to settle, because now it's living in reality, and reality is less frightening than pretending. When you sit with the truth of death, the small things stop owning you. The petty arguments, the status games, the obsessive planning, they lose their weight. Death reveals what's real, what's worth your energy, what's worth your attention. You stop rushing toward the future and start listening to the moment. There is also compassion in this practice. When you reflect on your own death, it becomes easier to forgive others, to understand that they too are temporary, that the person who wronged you, who triggered you, who disappointed you, they will die, just like you. And suddenly, the anger doesn't seem so necessary. You stop needing revenge. You stop needing to win. You begin to let go. This practice also helps prepare for the unknown. The mind wants certainty, but death is the one thing no one escapes and no one fully understands. By turning toward it, you begin to build a relationship with uncertainty. You train yourself to rest in not knowing, and that skill changes everything, because every anxious thought is a protest against uncertainty. But if you've learned to sit with death, you've learned to sit with life exactly as it is. There are gentle ways to practice cemetery contemplation without sitting in a charnel ground. You can reflect each day. This body will age, weaken, and die. It cannot be otherwise. You can walk through a cemetery, not to mourn, but to remember. You can look in the mirror and see your body not as something to fix, but as something passing, and therefore precious. You can sit quietly and feel your breath, knowing that one day it will stop. These reflections are not about sadness. They are about intimacy with truth. They strip away distraction. They help you see what's beneath the habits, the roles, the fears, what's left when all the pretending ends, and often what's left is love. Because when you realize time is short, you love better. You say what you mean. You reach out first. You let go of pride. You see people as fragile, not annoying. You stop delaying joy. You stop holding back. Death teaches urgency. Not the urgency to rush, but the urgency to live fully now. You begin to notice how many fears fade in the light of mortality. Fear of embarrassment, fear of not being enough, fear of being misunderstood. These are real, but they start to feel less important, because compared to dying with regret, a little discomfort doesn't seem so serious. And in the same breath, you begin to treasure the ordinary. The sound of the wind, the softness of someone's hand, the laughter that wasn't planned. These things stop being background noise. They become sacred, not because they last, but because they don't. The practice also shifts how you relate to your own suffering. When pain arises, you remember, this too will pass. When grief stays, you know it belongs, because everything that ends deserves to be mourned. You stop needing every moment to feel good. You start letting every moment be enough. In this way, death is not the end of peace. It is the beginning. It cuts through illusion like nothing else. It shows you what anxiety tried to hide, that you were never meant to hold it all, that you don't have to outrun time, that you can live deeply even while knowing you will die. And strangely, this awareness of death often leads to more joy, because now you're not waiting for a perfect life. You're not putting off happiness until things settle down. You're not spending your days rehearsing the worst. You're awake, alive, here. The mind doesn't need to push away death to find peace. It can include it, welcome it as part of the truth. And in doing so, it stops resisting life. Each breath is a reminder. Not one is guaranteed, but each one is a gift. And knowing that, really knowing it, is what makes peace possible. So you live with your eyes open. You love with your heart open. You walk this life not trying to escape the end, but letting the end give meaning to each step. And when you do this, the fear begins to loosen. The anxiety begins to fall quiet. Not because the unknown is gone, but because you've stopped pretending you're supposed to control it. This is what the cemetery teaches. Not despair, not fear, but honesty. And through honesty, freedom. Because when nothing is held forever, everything becomes enough. When death is no longer pushed away, when impermanence becomes a truth you live with rather than resist, something opens within you. What once felt urgent loses its grip. The noise of wanting, proving, defending, it begins to fade. But even with this deep clarity, one force still pulls the mind back into restlessness more than almost anything else. Speech. Not just what we say out loud, but the constant verbal energy that moves through thought, reaction, and commentary. Words are powerful, and without awareness, they scatter the mind before we even notice. In Buddhist practice, there's something called noble silence. It's not just the absence of speaking, it's a complete withdrawal from unnecessary verbal energy. A conscious step into stillness where speech no longer leads the mind, and the mind no longer depends on expression to feel real. This kind of silence doesn't suppress, it clarifies. Most people speak to feel in control, to fill space, to reduce discomfort, to feel heard, but very often speech is used not for truth, but to escape what's arising internally. Conversations turn into distraction, arguments turn into identity defense, advice turns into subtle self-importance. Even helpful words can be laced with attachment when they're said to keep the mind from sitting quietly with itself. Noble silence offers something else entirely. It strips away the noise that keeps the mind running in circles. It allows you to watch your inner world without having to comment on it, without needing to explain or be understood. And in that quiet, you begin to see how much of your anxiety is fueled by words, spoken or unspoken. You don't need to live in a monastery to practice noble silence. It begins with awareness. You start noticing how often you speak out of habit, how quickly you rush to respond, how often you fill space with commentary that doesn't need to be said. You begin to listen more, to pause before speaking, to feel the impulse to speak and choose restraint, not out of repression, but out of wisdom. When silence becomes intentional, you start to notice how speech shapes thought. how even the act of preparing to speak creates tension in the body. The mind anticipates, plans, rehearses, defends. These micro-movements of inner speech keep the nervous system slightly activated all day long. Noble silence interrupts this loop. It gives the mind permission to stop building its identity through words. There's a profound stillness that arises when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop responding just to be seen, when you allow experience to be what it is, without comment or conclusion. This doesn't make you distant. It makes you present. The less you speak, the more you hear, not just externally, but internally. You start to hear what's underneath the noise, the layers of feeling, the quiet signals, the subtle truths that are drowned out by constant speech. In silence, mental clarity becomes possible. Thoughts slow down. You begin to recognize patterns. You see how much of what you say is based on anxiety, filling space so others won't feel uncomfortable, or so you won't feel invisible. When this speech is paused, your nervous system finally gets a break. The mind, no longer pushed to translate every moment into language, begins to settle. This doesn't mean becoming mute. It means becoming wise. You speak when it's helpful, when it's necessary, when it brings connection or clarity. But you no longer feel the need to fill every space. You stop fearing silence in a conversation. You stop explaining your emotions before you've even understood them. You stop talking to prove you belong. Practicing verbal restraint helps cultivate presence. Every word becomes a choice. You learn to speak slowly, not to be dramatic, but to be intentional. You become aware of the energy behind your words. Are you speaking from fear, from impatience, from a need to be praised, or from clarity, care, truth? This level of attention to speech trains the mind to observe before it reacts, to respond from stillness rather than speed. There is also a social effect. When you practice noble silence, even part of the time, you become a different kind of presence in others' lives. You become someone who listens deeply, who doesn't interrupt, who allows silence in a conversation without making it awkward. And in doing so, you give others the space to be honest too. You begin to notice that most arguments don't come from difference, but from reaction. One word triggers another. One tone invites defense. One assumption fuels misunderstanding. Verbal restraint breaks that chain. It gives space. It allows temperature to cool. And when you do speak, people listen, because they know your words are chosen, not impulsive. This discipline also protects your energy. So much exhaustion comes from unnecessary speech, from performing, from retelling your stress all day, from over-explaining your feelings, from defending decisions that need no defense. Verbal restraint teaches you to trust the quiet, that not every thought must be said, that not every emotion must be explained to be valid. Over time, silence begins to feel safe, not empty, not lonely, but sacred. You learn to rest inside it, not as a way to hide, but as a way to return. The inner commentary begins to slow, the narrative softens. You become more aware of direct experience, sound, sensation, breath, space. Awareness stops running and starts resting. You may notice how the urge to speak comes with anxiety, a quickening of thought, a tightening in the chest, a rush of emotion. When you see this, you can pause, not to hold back your truth, but to make sure it's spoken with clarity, not urgency. Speech is a tool. Noble silence teaches you when to use it and when to put it down. Even in meditation, the mind uses speech, silent monologues, internal judgments, imaginary conversations. These are all forms of inner speech. Restraint doesn't mean suppression. It means noticing the momentum and gently stepping back, choosing not to follow, resting in the gap between thought and word. That gap is where insight lives. As silence deepens, so does self-awareness. You see how much of your identity is wrapped in language, the way you describe yourself, the stories you tell, the roles you perform. When this language slows, you begin to see yourself more clearly, not as a story, but as awareness itself, simple, unnamed, at peace. You may also notice how speech inflates the sense of self, how saying my opinion, my success, my problem keeps reinforcing a narrative that feeds anxiety. Silence softens that. You don't stop existing. You just stop clinging. You stop narrating every movement and start inhabiting it instead. Noble silence is not about becoming cold or withdrawn. It's about becoming more connected, but without the need for noise. Connection that comes from presence, not performance. From shared space, not shared analysis. You learn that understanding often arises more from listening than from speaking, that healing often happens more in stillness than in discussion. You don't have to live in silence to practice it. You can begin in small ways. A few hours without casual conversation, a walk without your phone, a meal eaten in quiet awareness, a pause before responding to a question. These moments teach the nervous system that it's safe not to perform, that you can be without explaining. This kind of silence also brings emotional clarity. When you stop talking, feelings have space to surface. Sometimes what rises is discomfort, restlessness, sadness, vulnerability. But in silence, these emotions can be felt without narrative, without needing to justify or fix. They come, they peak, they pass, and you remain. Even in relationships, silence can be powerful. It teaches you how to be with someone without constantly reacting, how to listen without planning your reply, how to support without controlling. When you speak less, you feel more, you give more space to others, and you discover that words are not the only way to care. There is a quiet power in not needing to fill space, in not needing to be the loudest voice, in not needing to offer answers. This is where wisdom begins. It's not always about having the right words. It's about knowing when words are not needed. In noble silence, your mind learns to trust itself. Not the thinking mind, but the awareness underneath. It learns that it doesn't need to rehearse every conversation. It doesn't need to defend every action. It doesn't need to speak to feel worthy. This shift creates peace. Not because life gets easier, but because your mind stops adding so much noise to it. You begin to meet life with fewer words and more presence, fewer reactions and more understanding. And slowly, over time, this silence moves with you. It stays behind your words when you speak. It holds your awareness when you listen. It becomes a quiet foundation, steady and clear. The world around you may stay noisy, but inside you've found something different. A silence that is not empty, but full of life. A quiet that is not lonely, but deeply connected. a mind that no longer needs to speak to be free, when words no longer race ahead of experience, when silence becomes a space rather than a gap to fill, the mind slows down in a way that is not dull but alive. Speech no longer drags the mind in 10 directions, and something deeper begins to come into focus. Even without speaking, thought still moves. Even when silent, the mind continues to produce reactions, judgments, stories. The question becomes, where do these thoughts begin? What sets them in motion? And why do they seem to lead again and again into stress, worry, fear? The Buddha described a map, a cycle, a chain of events that gives birth to all forms of suffering. It is not random, it unfolds in a precise sequence. One link triggers the next, feeding a loop that runs beneath awareness. This is dependent origination. It shows not just what suffering is, but how it forms, how it builds, and how to interrupt it. It begins not with thought, but with ignorance. Not ignorance as stupidity, but as a lack of clear seeing. Ignorance here means not knowing things as they really are. Not seeing impermanence, not recognizing the absence of a fixed self, not understanding that everything is arising from conditions. With this not knowing, the mind begins to construct a world based on misunderstanding. From ignorance comes formations, mental habits, emotional tendencies, impulses shaped by past actions. These are the patterns that operate without conscious intention. They're the leanings of the mind, toward worry, toward control, toward resistance. Formations move quickly and quietly. They form the background of personality, of habits, of reactions that feel automatic. Then comes consciousness, the awareness that arises based on these formations. It's not general awareness, but a specific, conditioned consciousness shaped by what has come before. If the formations are based in fear, consciousness meets the world already colored by anxiety. What is noticed, what is missed, what is emphasized, all of it is influenced by what consciousness is primed to find. Next is name and form, the mental and physical components of experience. This is how the mind divides the world. Feelings, perceptions, intentions, the body itself, all given names, labels, categories. This structuring creates the sense of a solid self inside a solid world. But it's all based on process, not permanence. Still, once this structure is built, everything that follows builds upon it. Then the 6 sense bases arise: the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. These are the gateways through which the world enters. Without them, experience cannot take shape. They are not passive. They are active processes shaping what is received and how it's received. And because they are rooted in conditioned consciousness, they do not see neutrally. They see what the mind is already leaning toward. With the sense bases in place, contact happens. This is the meeting point between the sense organ, the object, and the consciousness. A sight is seen, a sound is heard, a thought arises. Contact is the spark. It's the ignition of experience, and from that contact, feeling arises. Feeling is not emotion. Feeling in this teaching means pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every moment of contact produces one of these tones. This happens before thinking, before meaning, before story. It's immediate, and This simple tone becomes the seed of craving. If the feeling is pleasant, craving reaches out. If unpleasant, craving tries to push away. If neutral, craving searches for something else to feel. Craving is not just wanting, it is the desire to control experience, to hold on to what feels good, to avoid what feels bad, to fill the space when nothing feels like enough. Craving feeds restlessness. It creates the hunger that keeps the mind moving. From craving comes clinging, the moment when desire becomes attachment, not just wanting, but needing. Clinging attaches to ideas, people, outcomes, roles. It turns passing sensations into identity. Clinging takes the thought, "I feel anxious," and turns it into, "I am anxious." This tightens the sense of self and makes suffering feel personal and permanent. Clinging leads to becoming, the formation of a particular state of mind or way of being. This is where identity solidifies. You don't just feel fear, you become the fearful one. You don't just experience thought, you become the thinker. Becoming is the internal build-up of momentum, setting the conditions for future experience. And that leads to birth. In this context, birth doesn't only mean physical birth. It means the birth of selfhood in a specific form, the arising of a new mental world, a new role, a new fixation. Each moment of becoming gives rise to a sense of self being reborn again and again, not just across lifetimes, but across hours and days. Each new worry is a new birth of the anxious self. Each argument is the birth of the angry self. Each grasping thought is a whole identity being constructed again. And with birth comes aging and death, not just physically, but the inevitable passing away of every state we've clung to. What is born must dissolve, what is held must be lost. This is where sorrow arises, not because loss is wrong, but because it is resisted. The cycle completes, only to begin again. And anxiety is the tension created by living inside this loop without seeing it. Each link conditions the next, and the loop moves fast. A single moment of discomfort spirals through the whole chain before there's time to notice. But once it's seen, even a small break in the chain creates space, and that space changes everything. Awareness breaks the chain. When ignorance is replaced with understanding, the loop doesn't complete. When feeling is noticed without reaction, craving doesn't follow. When craving arises and is met with mindfulness, clinging softens. When clinging loosens, becoming slows. When becoming slows, identity becomes fluid, and in that fluidity, suffering loses its foundation. This is not about controlling each link, it's about seeing them arise, watching their movement, understanding their connection. You start to catch moments earlier, before the full narrative forms, before the emotions solidify. You notice that craving has already started to reach. You pause, you stay, you feel the pull, but you don't follow it. And in that refusal to follow, the chain weakens. You begin to experience life as unfolding conditions, not as fixed events. The mind starts to trust impermanence rather than fear it, because now it sees. Nothing arises without causes. Nothing stays without support. Nothing ends without freedom becoming possible. Dependent origination is not a belief. It is a description of experience. Every anxious thought has a beginning. Every spiral has a trigger. Every fear has a structure. The practice is to slow down enough to see it, not to avoid the chain, but to meet it with awareness at each step. When you feel discomfort and immediately reach for distraction, dependent origination is unfolding. When you sense judgment rising and notice the urge to defend yourself, the cycle is in motion. When you feel tired and begin to create stories of failure, the pattern is moving. But if you pause, feel, observe, you create a break. That break is the space where suffering ends. This teaching also shifts your view of self. You see that you are not a solid thing moving through time, but a constantly recreating process. You are not the fixed thinker of anxious thoughts. You are the unfolding of conditions, and when the conditions change, the experience changes. This insight softens identity, and that softening reduces fear. Because what fears death the most is the self that believes it is permanent. What fears uncertainty the most is the self that believes it must stay in control. But when self is seen as a process, fear loses its foundation, not because you become numb, but because you become wise. Dependent origination helps you stop blaming yourself for your suffering. It replaces shame with understanding. You see the pattern, not the failure. You see the process, not the flaw. And this shift turns judgment into curiosity. It makes the inner world a place of exploration, not condemnation. This teaching also brings compassion. When you see how suffering forms, you stop taking others' reactions personally. You recognize the same cycle in them. You hear someone speak harshly, and you see the clinging beneath it. You feel someone pull away, and you see the fear of loss driving them. This doesn't excuse harm, but it helps you respond with care rather than resentment. The teaching of dependent origination brings humility. You realize how much of your behavior has been automatic, how much of your reaction has been inherited. And instead of collapsing into guilt, you begin to step into responsibility, the kind that starts with seeing clearly and ends with choosing wisely. You start interrupting the cycle where you can. You feel tension and choose breath instead of distraction. You notice craving and choose presence over grasping. You sense clinging and let the feeling pass without naming it. These moments are small, but they build. Each one weakens the loop. Each one opens the heart. The freedom offered by this teaching is not an idea. It is the direct result of seeing the pattern and stepping out of it. Not once, but again and again, until the habit of suffering fades, until the reflex to grasp dissolves, until the fear of experience is replaced by the wisdom of impermanence. And what's left is not emptiness. It's peace. A peace that doesn't depend on everything going right. A peace that arises because you no longer need to run. Because you know how suffering begins, and you know how to let it end. Quietly, gently, one link at a time. When you begin to see how suffering is built, how each reaction feeds the next, how craving becomes clinging and clinging becomes becoming, there's a moment where the mind naturally pauses. You've seen enough of the pattern to know that continuing the cycle is optional. But even when wisdom is present, the body often still carries the momentum of the past. Thoughts may be recognized as empty, but they continue moving. Energy still swirls. Restlessness still vibrates through your chest or spine or shoulders. And no matter how clear your insight, sometimes what the mind understands, the body still needs time to release. This is where walking becomes not just movement, but medicine. In the Thai forest tradition, walking meditation is not a break from stillness. It is a deepening of it. It is a bridge between silence and activity, a place where mindfulness finds its footing. This form of practice takes the awareness cultivated in sitting and weaves it directly into movement, breath, and the world around you. It grounds insight in motion and steadies attention through rhythm. When practiced consistently, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for interrupting obsessive thought and restoring clarity to a cluttered mind. The practice is deceptively simple. You select a straight path, 5 to 10 meters long, natural and unforced. You walk back and forth slowly, with full presence. The eyes rest gently ahead, not focused, but open. The hands come together lightly or rest naturally. The steps are not exaggerated or mechanical. They follow a normal pace, just a little slower than usual. The attention rests on the sensations in the feet, on the feeling of lifting, moving, placing, touching. Each step becomes the object of awareness, not to block thought, but to return from it. The mind will wander. It will chase unfinished conversations, pending decisions, unresolved emotions. When it does, you don't correct it with force. You simply notice and return. The next step is always there, waiting, grounding, real. The rhythm of walking offers a structure the mind can rest in. Obsessive thoughts often arise from unstructured space. The mind fills the unknown with projections. It loops, but walking gives the nervous system just enough input to feel safe, while also leaving space for awareness to settle. It's a practice of returning again and again to something reliable. Contact, pressure, shifting, releasing. You might begin by labeling lifting, moving, placing, or left, right, left, right. But as mindfulness deepens, even the words drop away. You just feel. You stay with sensation, the warmth of the foot, the pull of the muscles, the slight sway of balance. You begin to discover that walking, when done with full awareness, becomes a complete meditation object, not less than the breath, equal to it. When the body is engaged and the mind is watching, a different kind of concentration arises, one that includes the senses, one that keeps you awake yet relaxed. Especially when mental energy is high or sitting feels agitating, walking can stabilize the mind in a way that no other posture can. It gives movement to restless energy without feeding the thinking mind. This practice also supports continuity. Often we meditate in fragments, sitting here, breathing there, returning to distraction all day. Walking bridges those fragments. It brings mindfulness into transition, into action. It teaches that awareness is not tied to stillness. It can move, it can walk, it can continue. The Thai forest monks often practice walking for hours each day, not to escape, but to deepen. They use it as a container, as a space where thoughts are allowed to appear without being believed. In walking, thoughts have room to rise and fall without being acted on. There's no need to suppress them. You walk with them. You allow them to pass. There is also emotional wisdom in this form of movement. Feelings stored in the body, frustration, sadness, tension, begin to unwind through the gentle repetition of steps. You don't need to process them with words. The body processes through movement, through rhythm, through presence. Each step allows release, not always dramatically but subtly, like water finding its level. As the mind settles into the steps, time begins to change. Minutes feel longer, but not in a burdensome way. The pressure to rush fades. The need to arrive disappears. There is just this moment, this foot, this ground. Awareness sharpens, sounds become clearer, the wind touches your skin more fully. You feel alive, not because anything special is happening, but because for once, nothing is being missed. The practice also strengthens equanimity. Thoughts will come. Some may be intense, but you learn not to stop for them. You don't chase them or run from them. You let them be. Just as you walk, you let the mind do what it does without giving it control. This trains a powerful form of non-attachment. One step at a time. Thought arises. Step. Emotion swells. Step. Memory appears. Step. Over time, this becomes more than just a practice session. It becomes a way of walking through life. Each transition, each routine moment, becomes a space for mindfulness to enter. The walk from the kitchen to the bedroom, the path from the car to the front door. These moments become invitations to return. You may also begin to sense the energetic balance of walking meditation. When the mind is dull, walking brings alertness. When the mind is overactive, walking brings steadiness. When emotions are overwhelming, walking creates space. It helps digest the experience of being alive without being overwhelmed by it. It is not a tool to avoid stillness, but to support it. The more mindful you are in walking, the more depth you find in sitting. The more you integrate attention into movement, the less the body pulls attention away when you rest. It becomes a cycle of support. Sitting refines, walking steadies. Together, they create balance. Walking meditation also reconnects you to the earth, not just as a concept, but as a direct experience. Each step becomes a reminder. You are supported. You are grounded. You belong. The earth holds your weight without question. The body knows how to move. Awareness knows how to meet it. Nothing is missing. You may find insights rising during walking that never appear during sitting. Something about the forward motion allows space for understanding. Not through analysis, but through felt sense knowing. You walk with a question, and the body answers, not in words, but in ease, in letting go. There is also healing in repetition. When a mind has been traumatized, it seeks patterns to feel safe. Walking meditation gives a gentle, predictable rhythm. No surprises, no demands, just step after step, a soft reconditioning of safety. This is not a bypass of deep pain, but a stable container in which it can be held. For those caught in chronic thinking, walking can become a reset, a chance to stop spiraling, to break the loop not by force, but by redirecting attention. The body doesn't need to be convinced. It just needs to be included. And the moment you feel your feet again, the mind begins to settle. Over time, walking becomes more than practice. It becomes refuge, a way to come home to yourself in the middle of chaos, a way to return without needing a cushion or a special time. Just a path, just your steps, just awareness, moving with the body. You begin to notice that each step is complete. that nothing is missing when you are truly there, that even in movement, peace is possible, that even in transition, stability exists. In a world that pushes for faster, walking asks you to slow down. In a culture that values output, walking reminds you of being. In a mind that overthinks, walking returns you to presence, not with effort, but with rhythm, not with concepts, but with sensation, not with force, but with feet. You don't need to fix your mind before you start. You only need to walk. The ground will hold you, the body will guide you, and awareness, patient and quiet, will meet you step by step. This is how the loop breaks. Not all at once, but one step at a time, mind moving with body, thought resting in presence. Nothing pushed away, nothing clung to, just walking, just now, just this. There's something deeply honest about walking with yourself. No pretending, no performing, no escaping into thought. Just the ground, the body, and the return to what is real. And as the steps continue, as thoughts lose their hold, you begin to feel something more primal, more ancient, stirring in the quiet. Not more thinking, but something deeper. Sound, vibration, resonance. Not noise from the outside, but rhythm from within. And this is where another doorway opens. One not through stillness or movement, but through voice, through tone, through chant. A direct and embodied way to calm the nervous system and bring the scattered pieces of mind back into harmony. Buddhist chanting is not a performance. It is not meant to entertain. It is a practice of tuning the body and mind through sound. For centuries, Pali suttas and sacred phrases have been chanted not only for their meaning, but for their effect on consciousness. Repeating the syllables slowly, gently, with full awareness shifts something inside. It bypasses the analytical mind. It works directly on the body's energy, on the breath, on the nervous system. The sounds of ancient languages like Pali or Sanskrit are structured with vibration in mind. When chanted slowly, they create subtle internal movements. The mouth shapes the air. The breath follows the rhythm. The chest opens. The face relaxes. The tone resonates in the head and torso. This isn't abstract. It's physical. Sound becomes a tool for inner balance, a kind of massage for the vagus nerve, a steadying of the heartbeat, a softening of the grip of anxiety. You don't need to understand the meaning of every word for the chant to work. The body understands tone before the mind interprets language, and because chanting slows your breath, it shifts the nervous system out of fight or flight and into rest and digest. You begin to feel more anchored, less scattered. The mind becomes quieter, not because you're silencing it, but because you're giving it something steady to follow. Chanting is not about belief. It's about direct experience. When done with sincerity and presence, it creates a state of coherence. Breath, sound, and awareness begin to move together. This synchronization is what calms the heart and regulates emotional energy. You may start with tension, but after several minutes of steady repetition, the body responds. Shoulders drop, thoughts settle. You return to something deeper than language. Some chants are long, others short. Even one word repeated with mindfulness can shift your state. The repetition brings rhythm. Rhythm builds structure. Structure creates a container where the mind can rest. This is especially useful when thought loops are active. The sound gives the mind something to hold, something to align with, and this alignment begins to undo the confusion created by scattered attention. The chants often begin with refuge, going for shelter in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. These are not abstract ideals. They are reminders. The Buddha represents awakening. The Dharma is the path of truth. The Sangha is the community of those walking with sincerity. Saying these aloud brings intention to the surface. It reminds the nervous system that safety is possible, that belonging is real, that clarity can be returned to. There are chants for protection, like the Ratana Sutta, and chants for loving kindness, like the Metta Sutta. Each has its own energy, but beyond content, it's the act of steady sound that matters. Sound removes the need to find the perfect thought. It takes over where words once created tension. Now the same voice becomes the vehicle for release. Chanting also supports emotional release. Emotions are often stored in the chest, throat, and stomach. These are also the places where sound resonates. When the voice is used in a non-performative way, it becomes a direct expression of feeling. You don't need to analyze your sadness. You give it sound. You don't need to explain your fear. You chant through it. The vibration carries what words cannot. This form of meditation also trains concentration. Unlike silent sitting, where the mind can drift quietly, chanting demands presence. You stay with syllables, pace, tone. You are either there or not. This makes it especially useful for minds that wander easily. The sound brings you back without judgment. Group chanting adds another dimension. When voices come together, something collective arises. Breathing synchronizes. Sound builds harmony. The individual nervous systems begin to regulate together. You feel part of something beyond your own thoughts. Isolation fades. The collective vibration becomes a shared grounding. But chanting alone is equally powerful. It becomes a way to care for your own energy, to regulate your state without needing to fix anything. You sit, you breathe, you begin, and the sound leads you deeper into yourself, into a space that holds everything without panic. A space where calm is not something to reach, but something to return to. The posture during chanting also matters. Sitting upright allows the diaphragm to move. The spine supports the breath. The chin is slightly tucked to open the back of the neck. The mouth stays soft. This physical alignment supports vocal resonance. It also creates a sense of dignity, an inner structure that holds you up when the mind wants to collapse. Chanting can be done slowly, almost whispered or strong and steady. The pace affects the state of mind. Slow chanting grounds. Faster chanting energizes. You learn to meet yourself where you are. If you feel heavy, you chant with brightness. If you feel restless, you chant with weight. The voice becomes your own medicine. There is also a devotional element, but it doesn't have to be religious. Devotion here means sincerity, full presence, offering your attention with care. It means stepping beyond analysis and into felt experience. It means trusting that the act of chanting itself is enough. No need for performance, no need for results, just sound, just awareness, just now. Over time, the body remembers. Chanting becomes a nervous system imprint. You say the first phrase and the body begins to soften. The breath lengthens. The tone of voice reminds the heart how to rest. This is not conditioning in a mechanical sense. It's memory. The body remembering what peace feels like through repetition. This practice also supports transitions. When the mind is between tasks or the heart is carrying weight, even a few minutes of chanting can reset your state. It marks a shift from outer to inner, from doing to being, from overwhelm to coherence. You don't have to chant perfectly. The sound doesn't have to be beautiful. It has to be real. Authenticity is what makes the vibration work. The body responds to sincerity, and when sound arises from presence, something within always listens. There's also a purification process. Chanting brings up what is unprocessed. As the voice opens, the deeper layers of feeling may surface: memories, grief, anger. The sound holds space for them to move, not to be explained, but to be felt and released. This is healing not through thinking, but through vibration. The practice doesn't end when the chant ends. The after effect stays. The quiet that follows is often deeper than any silent meditation. The body still hums with the echo. The mind rests in the space sound created. This is the pause where clarity returns, where decisions become simple, where anxiety loses its grip. Over time, chanting becomes part of your rhythm. Like walking or breathing, it becomes another way to return, to soothe, to focus, to remember. And because it uses voice, it connects the inner world to the outer. It unites awareness with action, intention with sound. You may find a phrase that works for you. One line, repeated slowly, becomes a rope you can hold. In Pali or your native language, it doesn't matter. The power is not only in meaning, it's in tone, in presence, in consistency. This is not a practice to force. It is one to explore. Some days you will want to be silent. Others, the voice will call you. Listen. Follow. Let the vibration teach you. Not through ideas, but through resonance, through experience. And slowly, chanting becomes less of a technique and more of a way of being. You speak with more care. You listen more closely. Your nervous system holds less tension. Your presence carries more steadiness. In a world that overwhelms with noise, chanting offers a different sound, one that restores, one that rebalances, one that brings the mind home to the body, the breath, the heart. Not through volume, not through force, but through vibration that begins inside and echoes far beyond it. And when the final syllable fades and the last vibration settles into silence, something remains. A stillness not born from effort, but from resonance. A calm that doesn't need to be explained. After chanting, the nervous system rests. The breath deepens without intention. The body softens its grip. But even in this silence, the path is not meant to be walked alone. Even the most centered breath, the most focused step, the most resonant chant, all happen within the context of a shared world. At some point, the heart begins to recognize what it needs is not more isolation, but more depth in connection. Not more socializing, but more sincerity. What breaks the spiral of mental storms is not always insight. Sometimes it's someone beside you, someone who sees you clearly and still stays. This is the power of noble friendship. In Buddhist teaching, Kalyana Mittata means spiritual friendship or noble companionship. It's not simply being around others. It's not casual comfort or convenience. It is the kind of relationship that supports awakening, a connection that holds truth, a presence that reminds you who you are when you've forgotten. The Buddha placed this kind of friendship at the very heart of the path, not as a support to practice, but as the practice itself. He once said that noble friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. This kind of friendship doesn't mean finding perfect people. It means surrounding yourself with those who reflect your deepest values, who challenge your delusion without judgment, who walk beside you, not ahead or behind. People who help you stay grounded when the mind starts spinning, not by giving advice, but by their way of being. Their steadiness becomes a mirror. Their honesty becomes a guide. Their presence becomes a medicine for disconnection. Mental storms often grow in isolation, not because solitude is dangerous, but because unshared suffering often turns into shame. The mind loops more tightly when it believes it is alone. Anxiety becomes harder to name. Doubt becomes louder. Thoughts grow more convincing. But the presence of a noble friend interrupts that spiral, not with solutions, but with recognition. To be seen clearly and gently is one of the most powerful antidotes to inner turbulence. Noble friendship is built through depth, not speed. It forms slowly, over time, through shared silence, shared practice, shared truth. It thrives on listening more than speaking, on being honest when it's hard, on holding each other to the path, not through pressure, but through presence. These relationships are not transactional. They are transformational. Such friends don't rescue you from your pain. They help you stay with it. They remind you to breathe when the chest tightens. They don't distract you from discomfort. They sit with you in it. They don't fix your confusion. They reflect back the parts you're ready to see. In their presence, the inner world becomes less threatening. The storm no longer isolates. It becomes shared space, and shared space is easier to hold. This kind of friendship also invites accountability, not the kind that pressures or polices, but the kind that holds a mirror gently. You begin to notice how you show up, how you speak, how you listen. You want to be honest, not for approval, but because sincerity becomes the ground of the connection. You find yourself wanting to stay true, not to impress, but to respect the shared clarity. Noble friendships are not always easy. They will stretch you. They will reflect the places where you cling. They will show you where your patterns repeat. But they do so without agenda, without trying to change you. They trust your process. They walk with you while you change yourself. And that trust becomes freedom. The presence of a noble friend can also ground you in moments of doubt. When practice feels stagnant, when the path feels unclear, when fear clouds everything, someone who has walked beside you, who knows your intention, who holds your goodness in view even when you can't see it, becomes the rope that pulls you back. Not through fixing, but through remembering. You hear their words in your own mind. You recall their steadiness, their way of pausing before reacting, of choosing silence over judgment, of staying open when others close. That memory itself becomes guidance. These friendships also help dissolve self-centeredness, not by forcing you to care about others, but by softening the illusion that you are separate. When someone truly sees you, the idea of isolation begins to crack. You start to recognize that your suffering is not unique, that your fears are not strange, that your longing for peace is shared. Compassion begins to move more freely, judgment begins to fall away, and love, not sentiment, but deep care, begins to form. Kalyana Mittata is not only about receiving support, it is about becoming that kind of presence for others, not by pretending to have answers, but by being willing to stay close when things fall apart, by listening without rushing to respond, by holding space that doesn't shrink when truth is spoken. When you become that kind of friend, you deepen your own practice. Your presence becomes part of someone else's path. Your stillness becomes a shelter. Community built on noble friendship doesn't have to be large. Even one or two people walking sincerely with you can change your life. Even short moments of shared clarity can redirect a troubled mind. What matters is not the number, but the quality. The willingness to go below the surface, the courage to show up when it's inconvenient, the patience to stay when discomfort arises. These friendships also help us navigate the parts of the path that are hard to talk about. The doubts we don't want to admit, the habits we're afraid to face, the fears we thought we had overcome but still return. When these are spoken into a space of respect, they lose their weight. When they're received without shock or dismissal, the shame dissolves. You begin to realize that healing doesn't happen alone. It happens in reflection, in resonance, in being met with presence instead of reaction. Noble friends also protect you from extremes. They remind you when you're pushing too hard. They reflect when you're avoiding something. They bring balance, not through criticism, but through perspective. Their steadiness becomes something you lean on, not because you're weak, but because interdependence is strength. No one wakes up alone. No one heals in isolation. The path is walked together, even when the steps are separate. There is also a quiet joy that comes from this kind of friendship, a joy that doesn't need entertainment or escape, a joy rooted in authenticity, in being seen without needing to perform, in holding space for someone else without needing to fix them. This joy becomes a support during difficulty. It reminds you why the path matters. It helps you return when practice feels dry. To cultivate noble friendship, you begin by showing up, by being present in shared spaces with openness, by listening more deeply, by speaking truthfully. You look for those who value what you value, who stay close to integrity, who ask hard questions gently, who listen to your pain without making it about them. You don't force connection, you stay consistent. You show up in silence and in storm. You offer your presence with humility, and slowly trust grows, depth forms, practice deepens, not just yours, theirs too. Noble friendship is mutual. It changes both people. It supports both minds. It creates a field where wisdom can take root. And when anxiety returns, and it will, you won't face it the same way. You'll carry the echo of another's steadiness, the reflection of your own strength seen in someone else's eyes. You'll know you're not walking blind. That someone is walking too, that even when silent, their presence still walks beside you. This is not a luxury on the path, it is the path. To walk with others in truth, to be a mirror for wisdom, to hold space for clarity, to let your nervous system settle not just in solitude, but in relationship, not just in quiet, but in companionship. There may be days where words are few, where contact is brief, but the connection remains. The support doesn't vanish. The memory of shared truth becomes something you carry, a subtle strength, a reminder that your peace is not just your own. It is woven through others, strengthened by others, shared with others. In a world of speed and noise and surface, noble friendship invites you deeper, into stillness, into honesty, into shared presence that doesn't need fixing. It asks nothing but sincerity, and in return, it gives everything that helps you stay. The mind can be loud, the path can feel long, but noble friends shorten the journey. Not by speeding it up, but by making it lighter to carry, by walking beside you step by step as you return to what's real, as you return to yourself. When the right people walk beside you, the path changes. It becomes steadier, clearer, more human. You're no longer carrying the weight alone. The presence of noble friends becomes a mirror for your strength and a balm for your doubt. But even with this support, even with steady steps and sincere practice, something else can quietly creep in. The pressure to do it all right. The subtle voice that says you should always be calm, always be mindful, always be improving. Spiritual tools that once helped begin to feel heavy. The path that once opened the heart starts to tighten around the edges. This is the moment to remember another teaching. The raft is for crossing, not for carrying. The Buddha told a story. A person comes upon a wide river. The current is strong, the other side is far. So they build a raft, carefully, skillfully. Piece by piece, they tie it together with vines and branches, with all their effort and attention. Then they climb on and paddle across. The raft carries them. It saves their life. But once on the other shore, the question arises, do they carry the raft on their back, or do they leave it behind? The raft is like the practices that brought you here: meditation, chanting, study, discipline. Each of them has purpose. Each of them offers structure, but they are not the destination. They are tools. And there comes a time when holding them too tightly begins to cause stress, when the identity of being a practitioner becomes another mask, when doing it all perfectly becomes more important than actually being free. Letting go of the raft doesn't mean throwing away wisdom. It means recognizing when attachment to the method becomes its own form of suffering, when presence turns into performance, when effort turns into identity. The same mindfulness that teaches you to watch thoughts can also teach you to watch how you relate to practice itself. Sometimes anxiety disguises itself as discipline. The need to check every box, to measure progress, to feel spiritual enough. But this need often comes from the same restlessness the practice was meant to calm. The raft was built to carry you out of the storm, not to weigh you down once the water is calm. It's important to see where striving hides, not in the obvious, but in the subtle. In comparing your path to others, in clinging to rituals without understanding, in expecting each sit to be deep, in feeling shame when the mind wanders. These are signs that the raft has become a burden, that the tool is being mistaken for the goal. Freedom doesn't come from perfect form, it comes from honest presence. If sitting meditation brings tension, then walking may be wiser. If chanting feels like pressure, then silence may be softer. If certain techniques cause guilt, then stepping back may be the most compassionate choice. The path is not rigid. It adapts. It responds. It's alive. Letting go of the raft requires trust, not in the absence of structure, but in the presence of your own awareness. You begin to trust that the understanding lives within you, not just in the forms, that you can meet each moment with the clarity you've trained. That wisdom doesn't need to be constantly proven, it simply needs to be remembered. This letting go is not laziness, it's maturity. It's knowing when effort becomes ego, when the search for peace becomes another form of control. It's the willingness to pause, to rest, to receive, to allow space between practice and performance, between method and meaning. There is also compassion in this release, the kindness to recognize that no technique will erase your humanness. That awakening isn't about escaping flaws, but about holding them without fear. That liberation is not perfection, it's spaciousness. Enough space to be who you are, as you are, without needing to be better first. Some people fear that letting go of structure means losing direction, but the path doesn't disappear when you stop gripping it. It often becomes clearer, because now you're walking with lightness, with trust, with awareness that doesn't demand a result. This also opens up a more intuitive way of living. You start to feel your way through each day, not by habit, but by presence. What practice supports the body today? What reflection calms the mind? What action expresses compassion? This is not abandoning the path. This is walking it with more ease, more honesty, more flexibility. And this shift helps dissolve spiritual pride, the subtle sense that you're more awake, more advanced, more disciplined. When the raft is clung to as identity, it separates, it becomes a badge. But when it's seen as a tool, humility grows. You begin to respect the path without needing to possess it. You also begin to see the same principle elsewhere, that every method, every belief, every role, parent, partner, teacher, seeker, is useful until it isn't. That freedom lies in knowing when to use and when to release, when to act and when to rest, when to speak and when to simply be. Letting go of the raft doesn't mean letting go of practice. It means no longer gripping it with fear, no longer needing it to define you, no longer turning it into another form of achievement. It becomes a choice, not an obligation, a resource, not a demand, a support, not a prison. You may find that some tools return in new ways, that breath awareness deepens without structure, that chanting arises naturally in moments of stillness, that silence becomes more nourishing when not scheduled. This is the flowering of understanding, when the essence of practice moves freely through your life without needing a fixed form. And sometimes the raft needs to be picked up again. That's okay. There will be other rivers, other storms. Letting go now doesn't mean never returning. It means trusting that you'll know when to hold and when to release, that the tools will be there when needed, that your awareness will know how to meet the moment. This is also where joy often returns. When the weight of expectation falls away, the lightness of presence rises. You stop measuring your path and start living it. You stop striving to feel peaceful and simply rest in what's already here. You let go, not out of rejection, but out of wisdom. and what remains is clarity, stillness, space. You may even begin to laugh more, to see the seriousness with softer eyes, to carry the teachings in your heart rather than on your shoulders, to walk the path not with tension but with grace. Because the purpose of the raft was never to be carried forever, it was to bring you here, to the place where you remember you've always been enough, where nothing more needs to be added, where the tools have done their work. And now, with both hands free, you can bow to the raft, place it gently on the shore, and take the next step unburdened, awake, at peace, and whole. There's something powerful about releasing what once held you. The raft, once necessary, is honored and left behind, not in rejection, but in understanding that tools are only tools. Practice is not the goal. Peace is not built through clinging. You step forward, lighter, freer, more attuned to the space where presence is enough. But even here, even after release, the mind can shift into something else, seeking. Not seeking objects or approval, but seeking a better moment, a better version of now. Something just slightly beyond what's already here. And this is where another layer of suffering hides. The endless loop of next. This is the movement of samsara, not just in lifetimes, but in thought. A loop that says this isn't it. A current of dissatisfaction that quietly fuels craving, one hope after another. It shows up in subtle ways. Maybe you meditate and feel calm, and then wish for it to last longer. Maybe you feel a glimpse of clarity and immediately want more. Maybe even peace itself becomes something to chase. The seeking never really ends. It just takes different shapes. This is the heart of samsara, not a place, but a pattern. The belief that fulfillment is always one step away, that the next teaching, the next retreat, the next insight will finally make things whole. But no matter how much you find, the sense of grasping remains. The mind shifts the target as soon as the moment arrives. This is not failure. It's a built-in habit of mind conditioned by fear and hope. Fear of what is, and hope for what might be instead. At its root, seeking comes from the assumption that what is now cannot be enough, that something is missing, that peace lives in the next thing. This belief feeds restlessness. It keeps the nervous system activated. It places pressure on every experience to deliver something more. Even the present moment becomes a task, something to improve, fix, upgrade. This is the hidden anxiety of becoming. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like planning. Sometimes it looks like subtle dissatisfaction. Sometimes it's the feeling that you need just one more thing to feel okay. Not just more money or comfort, but more understanding, more spiritual depth, more clarity. It's the belief that the life you're living is always just behind schedule. The trap is not that you want something better, it's that you believe better is elsewhere. That truth lives in the future, that now is only a stepping stone. When this belief is active, peace becomes conditional, and anxiety becomes the background noise of the mind. A quiet buzzing that says, not yet, not quite, almost. Samsara isn't just the suffering of pain. It's the suffering of never arriving. The constant inner posture of leaning forward, of resisting presence by reaching for the next moment. It can happen in small ways, scrolling through your phone for no reason, or big ways, leaving something good in search of something perfect. Either way, the result is the same: disconnection from the only place life actually happens. Even practice can become samsara. When meditation becomes a way to chase silence, when mindfulness becomes a way to avoid discomfort, when spiritual work becomes a ladder to climb. Each rung offers hope, but also reinforces the belief that you're not there yet, that you're never there. The way out isn't by stopping movement entirely. It's by stopping the belief that the next moment will be more real than this one. It's by recognizing the loop when it starts, that feeling of lack, that reaching, that pressure to move faster, and instead of obeying it, pausing. In that pause, you learn to feel what's already here. Not what should be, but what is. Maybe it's calm, maybe it's confusion, maybe it's nothing special. The point isn't to fix it. It's to stop running from it. To stop treating now as a problem to solve. When you stay still long enough, the seeking impulse becomes clear. It rises like a wave. It tightens the chest. It fills the head with urgency. You want to check something, learn something, escape something. This is the engine of samsara showing itself. But if you breathe, if you stay, if you don't act on it, the wave passes, and something else is felt. Stillness, simplicity, enoughness. You may notice how often this seeking is tied to identity. The mind says, "I'm someone who should be more evolved by now," or "I'm someone who needs to understand everything." The identity fuels the motion, but when identity is relaxed, the pressure softens. There's no one to improve, only awareness meeting itself. This doesn't mean stopping growth. It means changing your relationship to it. Growth is natural. Seeking is often reaction. Growth comes from curiosity. Seeking comes from fear. Growth trusts process. Seeking demands arrival. One nourishes, the other depletes. You also begin to notice how seeking creates comparison. When you believe someone else is further along, you feel behind. When you think you've reached something others haven't, you feel ahead. Both states disconnect you. They reinforce the belief that awakening is somewhere on a timeline and you have to find your place. But presence doesn't exist in time. It exists in experience. Even in daily life, the seeking pattern plays out. You drink tea and think about the next task. You walk and think about the destination. You finish one book and immediately order another. The rhythm of reaching becomes so normal, it feels invisible. But it's not neutral. It costs peace. It feeds anxiety. Interrupting the loop starts with awareness, catching the feeling of dissatisfaction just as it begins, noticing the moment you stop experiencing and start scanning for what's next, noticing the moment joy fades because the mind wants more, noticing the moment rest becomes guilt. These are the micro movements of samsara, the places where inner peace drains without your consent. To stop the cycle, you don't need to fight it. You need to feel it, to stay when the discomfort of stillness arises, to breathe when nothing is happening, to trust that this ordinary, imperfect moment is not lacking anything, that it doesn't need to become anything else to be enough. This is not settling. This is awakening to sufficiency. It's seeing that presence is not a state to chase, but a return to what's never left. It's the radical act of choosing to be here, not for a reward, but because here is what's real. It also means forgiving the moments you forget. You will seek again. the mind will hope again. You will lean forward into the future. That's okay. But each time you see it, each time you pause, each time you return, you weaken the loop. You begin to feel that peace isn't found at the end of the path, but in the way you walk it. Eventually, the seeking mind begins to slow on its own, not because you've reached everything, but because you've stopped needing to. You start to enjoy what's already unfolding. You listen more deeply, you taste more fully, you rest more willingly. And in that rest, the fear begins to fade. The fear that you'll miss something, that you'll never be whole, that you have to keep chasing or fall behind. You realize there is nowhere to arrive, no final version of you that solves everything, just presence, just breath, just this. The trap of next is a subtle one, but once seen, it begins to dissolve, not through effort, but through awareness, through the quiet understanding that striving doesn't end suffering. It often sustains it. You begin to walk differently, not trying to get somewhere, but expressing the path in each step. You sit not to become still, but because you already are. You listen not to gain insight, but because the moment deserves your full attention. And slowly, the restlessness that once felt so normal loses its pull. You don't need to rush. You don't need to prove. You don't need to upgrade this moment. Because there's no better place to be than here. No better version of you to wait for. No future that contains more life than this one. When that truth is felt, not just believed but lived, the loop unwinds, and what remains is peace. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer running. You have returned to now, and now is already whole. Once the habit of chasing dissolves, once the mind stops leaning into future fantasies and begins to rest in what's already here, something quieter begins to reveal itself. The space around experience becomes wider. The need to fix or improve each moment weakens. But even in this stillness, something else may stir beneath the surface. Restlessness, mood swings, anxiety, even confusion can still arise, often without warning. Not because you're seeking, but because you're feeding. Not with intention, but unconsciously. The body and mind are always being nourished by what's taken in. Not just food, but impressions, intentions, and mental patterns. This is where the teaching on the 4 nutriments becomes essential. Not as a metaphor, but as a precise understanding of how suffering is sustained. The Buddha described 4 types of nutriment, 4 sources of energy that keep the stream of life, consciousness, and mind-body processes flowing. They don't just shape the body, they shape emotion, perception, reactivity, and clarity. Each of them feeds or weakens anxiety depending on how we relate to them. Most people focus only on one type, physical food, but there are 3 others, equally powerful, often ignored. Together, they form the architecture of your inner life. The first is edible food. It's the most visible. What you eat directly affects your energy, your focus, and your emotional tone. Food impacts blood sugar, inflammation, hormone levels, all of which influence your baseline mood. If the body is in distress, the mind becomes less stable. When meals are irregular, rushed, or overly stimulating, the nervous system often moves into a low-level stress response. This sets the stage for anxiety, not as a reaction to thought, but as a physiological background. Eating with mindfulness changes this. The act of slowing down, chewing fully, and paying attention allows digestion to activate more fully. It also sends signals of safety to the body. Regular meals, balanced nutrition, and calm environments during eating are not luxury. They're a form of practice, not about perfection, but about attunement. You begin to sense what the body actually needs, rather than eating from habit or emotion. When the body is nourished properly, the mind has a steadier foundation. The second nutriment is sense impressions. This includes everything taken in through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Every sound, image, touch, and idea becomes part of what shapes your inner state. In a world saturated with input, the nervous system often becomes overwhelmed without realizing it. Doom scrolling, violent entertainment, chaotic environments, or simply too much stimulation can overfeed the mind with agitation. The result is not always immediate. It builds over time. Being mindful of what you consume through your senses is not about restriction. It's about recognizing what uplifts, what calms, and what disturbs. Silence becomes nourishing, nature becomes stabilizing, beauty becomes medicine. Harshness, speed, and noise begin to show their effects. Racing thoughts, mood swings, reactivity. When you clean up what enters the mind, inner space becomes clearer. You see more, react less, and begin to sense when overstimulation is tipping into anxiety. This also includes digital habits. What you read, watch, and scroll through becomes mental food. If your day is filled with conflict-based news, superficial content, or endless comparison, the result will not be neutral. Each moment spent consuming stress-based material reinforces fear-based thought loops. You may not feel it instantly, but you carry it. Curating your attention is not indulgence, it's self-respect. It's a commitment to internal balance. Just as you choose clean food for the body, you begin to choose clean impressions for the mind. The third nutriment is volition, intention, will, or desire. This is what drives action. Every decision, whether spoken or silent, is powered by volition. The quality of this intention shapes how energy flows. If the underlying volition is fear, anxiety is never far. If it's driven by greed or self-centeredness, the mind will experience contraction. When volition is rooted in compassion, clarity, or truthfulness, the entire nervous system aligns with peace. This type of nourishment is subtle, but it's constantly active. Even your reason for practicing becomes a form of food. Are you sitting to escape your life or to meet it more honestly? Are you acting from a place of lack or from love? The deeper you look, the more you begin to see how much your mood and thought patterns are shaped by the engine running quietly in the background. Volition also creates karmic momentum. What you want, fear, avoid, or obsess over doesn't just stay as thought. It turns into behavior, and repeated behavior reinforces identity. To change suffering at the root, volition must be examined with honesty. This isn't about suppressing desire. It's about seeing it clearly and choosing wisely. When intention becomes wholesome, even difficulty can be met with dignity. You begin to ask, what am I really trying to achieve in this moment? What's underneath my action? Is this about control or care? Is this reaction or wisdom? Each moment of clarity weakens the pull of reactive patterns. Over time, volition becomes less compulsive and more aligned. The anxiety created by misdirected energy slowly quiets. The fourth nutriment is consciousness itself. This is the field in which experience arises. Consciousness is not fixed. It changes based on what it contacts. What you pay attention to grows stronger. What you rehearse becomes familiar. If your awareness constantly orbits around fear, it builds neural pathways and emotional habits to match. The mind begins to expect threat, even in safety. The result is chronic tension, even when life is stable. You are always shaping consciousness through what you dwell on, through your internal narratives, judgments, and habits of perception. A mind trained on lack will keep finding deficiency. A mind trained on impermanence will find freedom even in loss. Consciousness is conditioned, but also conditionable. You don't have to be a victim of its tendencies. You can choose where to place attention, not as suppression, but as wisdom, redirecting toward presence, toward appreciation, toward clarity. This is why mindfulness is so transformative. It gives you the power to choose your object of awareness, and that choice is what feeds the next moment of mind. Instead of being swept away by reaction, you begin to live intentionally. Each moment becomes a chance to direct energy toward liberation rather than entanglement. Understanding the four nutriments gives you a clear map. You begin to see that anxiety is not random. It is not purely mental. It is often the natural result of what's being consumed, moment by moment. Nourishment is not only what goes in, it's what stays. What's repeated, what becomes familiar. To change your mental state, you begin by changing what you feed. This awareness creates a new kind of responsibility, not guilt, but maturity. You begin to recognize that what you allow into your space, through the body, the mind, the senses, shapes your experience. This is empowering. It returns agency. You can't control every input, but you can shape your environment. You can say no to what depletes and yes to what restores. It also teaches balance. You stop being passive in your relationship with the world. You notice what leaves you drained. You honor what leaves you nourished. You take breaks from screens, from noise, from people who deplete you, not to escape, but to reset, to return to yourself. You stop treating calm as accidental. You start making space for it deliberately. Over time, this awareness becomes embodied. You don't need to think through every choice. The body begins to guide you. You feel when something is too much, when input has overloaded the system, when you need silence or nature or breath. You learn to trust these signals. They are not weakness, they are wisdom. Even in relationships, this teaching applies. Some conversations nourish, others agitate. Some dynamics lift you into clarity, others pull you into confusion. You don't avoid life, but you learn where to place your energy. You become less reactive, more intentional. You begin to cultivate environments, external and internal, that reflect your deepest values. What you feed, you strengthen. This is not just a lesson, it's a law. If you feed agitation with distraction, it grows. If you feed fear with avoidance, it expands. But if you feed presence with breath, if you feed kindness with action, if you feed peace with space, then those qualities begin to take root. Nourishment becomes your practice, not just what you do on the cushion, but how you live, how you eat, listen, speak, move, how you choose silence, how you select your input, how you relate to craving, how you stay present. Not to chase perfection, but to care, to live in a way that supports clarity rather than confusion. This is not about controlling everything. It's about being awake to what enters your system. It's about choosing not to numb out, about respecting the mind enough to give it clean food, about respecting the heart enough to protect its space. You stop asking why anxiety keeps returning. You start asking, what have I been feeding it? And then, gently, without judgment, you change the meal. You offer presence, simplicity, breath, stillness. You give the mind space. You give the body rest. You give the nervous system what it really needs, not more input, not more seeking, just less disturbance, just more space. And in that space, you begin to heal, not through control, but through care, moment by moment, thought by thought, choice by choice. This is how suffering weakens, not through fighting it, but through starving it of what keeps it alive, and feeding instead what leads you home. Once you begin to see clearly what you're feeding, the whole rhythm of your inner world changes. You stop fueling fear with stimulation. You stop reinforcing confusion with unconscious habits. The mind becomes quieter, not because it was forced, but because you stopped giving it what keeps it spinning. You learn to nourish peace instead of pressure. But even when the mind settles, even when rest is finally possible, something else can quietly sneak back in, a subtle, tight loop that wraps around awareness itself. It's not the original fear, but a reaction to that fear, a second wave that brings judgment, shame, and tension, and often, without even knowing it, you're no longer afraid of the world. You're afraid of how you feel. This is what's sometimes called the third arrow. The Buddha once described how suffering arises not just from pain, but from the reaction to pain. The first arrow is the initial pain or discomfort. Something painful happens. The second arrow is the mind's reaction, anger, resistance, blame. But many never realize that there's a third arrow that's often even more destructive. It's the fear of your own fear, the anxiety about your anxiety, the shame about your reaction, the loop that turns one moment of discomfort into hours of inner turmoil. The third arrow is subtle because it doesn't feel like another event. It feels like who you are. When anxiety arises, the third arrow says, "Why are you like this again?" When sadness appears, it whispers, "This shouldn't be happening anymore." The mind becomes the judge, the critic, the commentator. It layers over the original experience with a sense of failure. Not only are you feeling anxious, you're anxious about feeling anxious. Not only are you overwhelmed, you're overwhelmed about being overwhelmed. This meta layer creates a cycle that feeds itself. The nervous system senses danger, and the mind adds interpretation. It labels the feeling as bad, wrong, or unacceptable. That judgment then becomes a trigger for more fear. You try to push the feeling away. You analyze it. You get frustrated with yourself for still having these emotions, and each attempt to fix it only confirms that something must be wrong. But the truth is, the anxiety was never the problem. It was the added fear, the belief that it shouldn't be there, that turned it into suffering. The third arrow hides in the spaces between thoughts. It shows up in how you brace your body, how you shorten your breath, how you speak to yourself without noticing. And because it feels so familiar, it often goes unquestioned. To break the loop, you have to go underneath the reaction, not to fight it, but to see it. You begin by acknowledging the original discomfort, fear, sadness, restlessness. And then, instead of pushing it away, you notice what the mind is doing on top of it. You ask, what am I believing about this feeling? Am I resisting it? Am I ashamed of it? Am I expecting myself to be beyond this? This kind of reflection isn't analysis, it's awareness. It's bringing the reaction into the light, so it no longer drives your behavior. You begin to notice how often your suffering isn't from the feeling itself, but from trying to not feel it. The third arrow is the tension of non-acceptance, the war against what already is. The antidote is not control, it's permission. You allow the fear to be present without needing it to vanish. You stop seeing the emotion as failure. You treat it like weather, passing, temporary, not you. You stop holding your breath, waiting for peace. You make space for the discomfort to sit beside you, to be felt without being resisted. Sometimes this means doing nothing, not because you're ignoring it, but because doing is what kept the loop alive. Every attempt to solve the anxiety reinforces the belief that it's dangerous. But when you let it be, something changes. The system relaxes. The pressure lifts. The emotion softens, not because you fixed it, but because you didn't feed it. This shift is gentle. It's subtle. It begins with how you speak to yourself. Instead of, "I can't believe I'm feeling this again," you say, "It's okay. This is just a moment." Instead of, "I should know better," you say, "Even this belongs." That inner voice doesn't need to be perfect, just kind, just spacious enough to allow the feeling without rejection. The third arrow also shows up in practice itself. You sit down to meditate and feel anxious and immediately think, "I'm doing this wrong." You hear silence, then hear your thoughts and assume you're failing. But those judgments are the third arrow. They are not the truth. They are habits. When you learn to recognize them, you disarm them. You remember that the purpose of practice is not to eliminate discomfort. It's to be with it wisely. Another way to break the loop is to shift attention to the body. Anxiety lives in the chest, the stomach, the jaw. The third arrow lives in the mind. When you drop into sensation, warmth, pressure, breath, you bypass the story. You return to what is real. You begin to see that the feeling, no matter how strong, is just that, a feeling, not a problem, not a prediction, not a personal flaw. This kind of presence builds resilience. You stop fearing your emotions. You stop fearing your own mind. Even when discomfort arises, you carry a quiet confidence. You know you don't need to collapse into it. You know you don't need to escape it. You can sit, breathe, feel, and stay. Over time, this rewires the system. The nervous system learns that discomfort doesn't mean danger. The mind learns that fear doesn't need to be resisted. You unlearn the habit of self-rejection. You learn the art of staying, and that staying becomes a deep form of self-trust. You may notice that your anxiety still appears, but it passes more quickly. It feels lighter. It doesn't spiral, because now it's not being held in place by resistance. The third arrow no longer lands. It's noticed and dropped. The space between feeling and reaction widens, and in that space, peace can enter. This isn't about mastering every emotion. It's about softening the grip. It's about no longer turning pain into punishment, no longer turning emotion into identity. You feel sad, but you're not a sad person. You feel afraid, but you're not a broken mind. These are waves. You are the ocean, deep, still, unmoved beneath the surface. Self-compassion plays a key role here, not as a technique, but as a way of being. You begin to treat your own struggle the way you'd treat a friend's, with care, not criticism, with presence, not pressure. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and begin asking, "What does this part of me need right now?" Often the answer is simple: breath, warmth, quiet, space. You also begin to recognize how the third arrow isolates. It makes you feel like no one else goes through this, like your anxiety is unique, but it isn't. Everyone feels fear, everyone loops in thought, everyone forgets their own wisdom. When you remember that, the shame dissolves. You begin to feel connected again, not through perfection, but through shared humanness. Practice becomes lighter too. You stop meditating to get rid of anxiety. You meditate to know it, to befriend it, to make space for the whole range of being. And in that space, something changes, not always immediately, but deeply. The parts of you that once felt unlovable begin to rest. They stop fighting. They begin to trust. This is the heart of dismantling the third arrow. It's not about finding peace by avoiding discomfort. It's about remembering that peace is what allows discomfort to be there without collapsing. It's about remembering that your nervous system doesn't need perfection. It needs presence. That your mind doesn't need to be quiet. It needs to be understood. And slowly, the need to fear your fear fades. The pressure to feel only good things weakens. You begin to trust the flow of your own experience, not because you've figured it out, but because you've stopped turning against it. That's what healing looks like. Not the absence of difficult moments, but the absence of self-attack in their presence. You stand where you once ran. You breathe where you once panicked. You stay soft where you once fought. And in that softness, something beautiful happens. The arrows fall. Not because there are no more challenges, but because you've stopped shooting yourself. Because you've remembered that you don't need to be free from pain to be free within it. Because you've discovered that even anxiety, when met with love, loses its power. And that is peace, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of kindness in every feeling that comes. When the third arrow is no longer drawn, when the mind stops turning against itself in fear of fear, a quiet space opens. Not the kind created by pushing everything away, but the kind that remains when resistance falls. That space doesn't always feel extraordinary. It can feel soft, unremarkable, almost empty. But stay long enough in that openness, and something begins to reveal itself. Not through effort, but through stillness. Not as a reward, but as a signpost. The deeper the mind settles, the more it begins to show signs of calm that aren't created by thought. These are known as nimitta, subtle mental signs that arise not from imagination, but from the natural unfolding of quiet awareness. Nimitta are not visualizations. They are not fantasies or projections. They are spontaneous markers of depth in meditation. They appear when the mind becomes unified, when the usual movements of craving and resistance have paused, and what remains is attention gathered in stillness. The appearance of a nimitta is not the goal of practice, but its reflection. Just as the moon is reflected clearly only on still water, these signs arise only when the surface of the mind becomes still enough to hold them. Most commonly, nimitta present as light. Not physical light through the eyes, but an internal radiance that arises in perception. It may appear as a soft glow, a stable brightness, or a subtle field of color. For others, the nimitta might come as a felt sense of spaciousness, buoyancy, or radiant calm. It is not something you try to make happen. In fact, trying prevents it. It arrives when the effort to arrive has fallen away. Understanding nimitta begins with understanding the conditions that support them. The mind must be quiet, but not dull, alert, but not tense. This balance comes from steady attention to a meditation object, often the breath. As the breath becomes subtle, the mind becomes collected. Distraction fades. The body feels light. The sense of boundaries begins to dissolve, and the center of attention becomes refined and stable. When attention becomes so steady that it no longer jumps to thought or external sensation, a shift occurs. The breath may disappear from awareness, not because it's stopped, but because the mind no longer needs to hold it. In that moment, something new appears, a gentle brightness, a presence without shape, a quality that doesn't need to be defined to be trusted. It's easy to miss this moment, especially if the mind is expecting something dramatic. Nimitta are often quiet. Their power lies not in what they show, but in what they indicate. That the mind is no longer scattered. That awareness is beginning to unify. That stillness is no longer partial, but complete. The danger at this point is craving. When the nimitta appears, the untrained mind may grab for it, try to control it, try to hold it in place. This grasping instantly disrupts the stillness that allowed it to arise. The light flickers, fades, or becomes unstable. The lesson is clear. You cannot own stillness. You can only rest within it. Letting the nimitta remain without interference is a subtle art. You stay present. You don't analyze. You don't direct. You rest in awareness of the sign, letting it deepen naturally. The nimitta then becomes a gateway, not something you focus on in the usual sense, but something that holds your attention effortlessly, like being drawn into a gentle current. This deepening often leads to the absorption states known as jhana. In these states, the mind becomes fully unified with the meditation object. Thought ceases. Time dissolves. The sense of self recedes. There is only knowing, calm, still presence. Nimitta is not the absorption, but the threshold, the signal that the door is open. It's important to remember that not all nimitta are visual. For some, it might feel like a centerless silence, a clarity so still it feels luminous, even without form. Others may sense a kind of inner expansion, no edge, no center, only presence. What matters is not the form, but the quality. Is it steady? Is it peaceful? Does it arise from calm, not force? The presence of nimitta also helps reveal the nature of the mind. You begin to see that thought is not the default. That awareness, when unclouded, naturally rests in peace. That what you are looking for has always been there, just covered by agitation. This insight doesn't need words. It arrives as knowing, direct and complete. Over time, the nimitta becomes familiar. Not something you chase, but something you trust. Its arising confirms that the conditions for stillness have matured. It becomes a guide, not something to cling to, but something to recognize as the mind's way of saying, "I'm here, I'm steady, let me deepen." This stage of practice requires patience. The mind may fluctuate. Some days the nimitta appears, other days it doesn't. You learn not to judge, not to compare. You return to the basics: posture, breath, attitude. You know that depth is not in the experience, but in the steadiness of presence. There is also a danger in becoming attached to the nimitta itself, to think of it as a goal, a sign of success. But attachment to subtle states is still attachment. The teaching remains: use the raft, then let it go. Let the nimitta be a tool, not a trophy. Let it support your settling, not distract you from the deeper letting go that follows. As the mind becomes more familiar with these signs, daily life changes too. You start to carry that same quiet into movement, into speech, into relationships. The mind becomes more sensitive to disturbance, but also more forgiving. You don't need the nimitta to appear in daily life for its effect to remain. The residue of that deep stillness lingers. It shapes how you respond, how you listen, how you hold discomfort without collapse. You also begin to recognize the early conditions that lead to stillness, the habits that support clarity, the ones that weaken it. You become less tolerant of internal noise, not because it's bad, but because you've tasted what silence can reveal. You move through life not chasing states, but protecting the simplicity that allows them. In this way, nimitta becomes more than a meditation concept. It becomes a way of sensing the internal climate, a signal of alignment, a reminder that peace is not an idea, it's a real, embodied experience. One that the mind knows how to return to when given the space. This deep calm is not separation from the world. It's intimacy with reality. It allows you to meet suffering without panic, to be with joy without clinging, to sit in the center of the storm and not be swept away. Nimitta is not the end of the path. It is a marker, a turning point, a whisper that says, "Stay. This is the way." No need to rush, no need to grasp. The stillness is already inside you. The light already shines. All you have to do is rest, let go of the noise, trust the quiet, and return, again and again, until the signs appear, not because you forced them, but because you finally stopped trying. And the mind, relieved of effort, opened itself to the peace that was always waiting. When the mind rests deeply and nimitta arises, you begin to taste the profound calm that has nothing to do with thinking. Not an idea of peace, but direct experience, an internal brightness, a centerless stillness, a depth where nothing needs to be said or fixed. These signs don't just reflect concentration, they reveal something more fundamental. How little of what we normally identify with is necessary for awareness to be fully alive. In that silence, the usual stories fade. The familiar self loses its shape. And what's left is something much simpler, much more honest. But when the sitting ends and the body is felt again, something else returns with it. Tension, discomfort, image, the sense of being someone in a body, with all the attachments and fears that come with it. This is where the contemplation of the 32 parts of the body becomes a tool, not to disconnect, but to see clearly. This practice is direct and grounding. It begins by breaking down the illusion of the body as a unified, beautiful, or fixed object. In daily life, the body is often seen through emotion, through opinion, through judgment. We compare, protect, decorate, worry, and strive. But underneath all that, the body is not what we believe it to be. It's a collection of elements, constantly changing, never entirely under our control. The Buddha taught contemplation of the 32 body parts as a way to loosen the grip of attachment and pride, and also to free the mind from fear. This isn't about rejecting the body or thinking negatively of it. It's not a punishment. It's a practice of seeing truth without distortion. By mentally dividing the body into parts, hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, and continuing through flesh, organs, bones, and fluids, you begin to disrupt the automatic sense of me and mine. You stop seeing the body as a solid self and start seeing it as a process of nature. This shift in perception changes how suffering is experienced. Physical discomfort becomes less personal. Aging loses some of its sting. Fear of appearance and comparison starts to weaken. What once felt like a source of identity starts to look more like a changing system. This change is not abstract. It's felt in how you relate to your body every day. The craving to control, to perfect, to protect starts to soften. As you recite and reflect on the 32 parts, either silently or aloud, you bring the mind to the direct experience of the body as it is, not as a social image, not as a concept, but as sensation. The repetition trains the mind to see beyond surface beauty or shame. Hair is just hair. Skin is just skin. Blood is just blood. Each part, taken individually, has no special status. But when strung together in illusion, they create attachment. This meditation also works deeply with tension. Many people carry stress in their body without realizing it comes from identification. The shoulders clench to uphold an image. The stomach tightens in fear of being judged. The jaw locks to hold back emotion. By dissecting the body in awareness, you begin to dismantle the layers of meaning placed upon it. This doesn't erase sensation, but it clears the false ideas that turn sensation into suffering. You start to understand that the body is not a problem, but the grasping around it is. The need for it to look or feel a certain way, the fear of it aging, the shame of its imperfections. When you see each part clearly, that pressure lifts. You're not reducing the body, you're freeing it from story. This practice also interrupts self-view at a deeper level. It's easy to say, "I'm not my body," but still carry that belief unconsciously. The 32 parts contemplation helps reveal how deep the identification goes. It shows how quickly the mind contracts around a single sensation and calls it me. How easily appearance becomes identity, how pain becomes personal, and how fragile that sense of self really is. By returning again and again to the list, the mind is trained to see with balance. The parts of the body are not rejected, but put in perspective. No single part carries the burden of beauty or failure. They all arise from conditions. They all change. They all return to the earth. This reflection becomes especially powerful when practiced during sitting or lying down, where the body is still. You mentally scan each part, visualizing, sensing, naming. The practice can be slow, with attention lingering on each item, or rhythmic, like a chant. Either way, the goal is not intellectual understanding, but direct perception, feeling the truth of impermanence, of non-self, of the body as nature. Over time, a quiet respect arises, not the kind based on admiration, but on truth. You care for the body not out of vanity, but out of clarity. You feed it, clean it, rest it, because it is a vehicle, not an identity. And that shift makes daily life lighter. There's less pressure to be seen a certain way, less fear when illness comes, less despair when youth fades. Because now you know what this body truly is, a temporary arrangement of elements. The contemplation also protects the mind from extremes. When the mind clings too much to pleasure, the practice brings balance. When the mind falls into disgust or aversion, the same contemplation restores equanimity. It reminds you that the body is neither to be worshipped nor rejected. It is to be understood, and through understanding, peace is possible. This practice also brings humility. You realize that every body, yours, others, all beings, is subject to the same truth. That behind appearance is the same structure. That pain and aging and death are not personal tragedies, but universal conditions. Compassion grows from this. You begin to soften your judgments of others, to look past the surface, to connect more deeply. You may also notice a new kind of freedom in sensation. Sensations no longer control your mood. Pleasure is enjoyed, but not chased. Discomfort is noted, but not exaggerated. The body becomes less of a battleground and more of a field for mindfulness, a place where impermanence can be seen clearly and met with wisdom. This clarity can extend into everyday choices. What you eat, how you move, how you speak about your body, all of it begins to reflect a quieter mind. Not because you're trying to be different, but because your relationship to form has changed. You no longer serve the image, you serve awareness. The 32 parts contemplation also deepens insight into the elements. You begin to feel the body not as flesh and skin, but as earth, water, fire, and air, solidity, fluidity, warmth, movement. These elements don't belong to anyone. They arise and pass, form and dissolve. Seeing this changes how fear is experienced. Fear of injury, loss, change, it all begins to loosen, because the body is no longer seen as permanent or personal. Practicing this reflection with consistency rewires the inner lens. The mind that once narrowed around physical identity now opens into space. You stop seeing your reflection as a verdict. You stop reacting to every sensation as a crisis. You start living from a place that is deeper than appearance, deeper than physical form. This doesn't mean detaching from the body in a cold or indifferent way. It means meeting the body with reality. And in that meeting, there's room for care, rest, appreciation, but without obsession, without pressure, without fear. The more this insight matures, the more you feel its ripple in emotional life too. Reactions lose some of their urgency. Desires don't burn so hot. The need to defend, to impress, to hold on softens, because now you've seen what the body is. You've seen what the self is not. And in that seeing, peace begins to feel natural. Not because you escaped the body, but because you saw through the illusions placed on it. Not because you abandoned form, but because you stopped mistaking it for something solid and separate. So, the practice continues, not for perfection, but for freedom. Not to numb feeling, but to see through clinging. To feel the breath without building a self around it. To touch the skin without defining identity. To move, live, and care, not from ego, but from understanding. This is what the contemplation gives. Not answers, but perspective. Not detachment, but peace. A shift so gentle it may be missed, but so powerful it changes everything. You carry this clarity into life, into movement, into aging, into pain, into beauty. And with every moment, you remember, this too is just a part. This too is just a process. And I do not need to cling to what is passing to know what is real. When the illusion of the body begins to dissolve, when each part is seen not as self, but as a changing process of nature, something inside shifts. What once felt solid becomes spacious. What once demanded control begins to soften. You start to see not just the body differently, but your whole experience. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, all begin to lose the weight they once carried. And in that shift, a deeper question arises. If even the body is not who I am, what else have I been mistaking for self? The answer leads straight to the structure of thought itself. Not isolated thoughts, but the entire system of overthinking that once ruled the inner life. The teachings point to something beyond the endless movement of the mind. Stream entry. Stream entry, the first irreversible shift in Buddhist awakening, is not a mystical status. It is the beginning of the end of confusion. It is the moment when the core habits that feed suffering are finally seen through in a way that cannot be unseen. It is not a state that needs to be sustained. It is a turning, a reorientation of the whole path. And what changes most deeply is the relationship to thought. Not that thoughts stop, but that their power collapses. Before this shift, the mind tends to live in constant conversation with itself, planning, regretting, comparing, doubting. These patterns are not neutral. They shape perception, emotion, and action. Overthinking becomes the atmosphere in which experience happens. It colors everything. And because the thoughts are so loud and constant, they are often mistaken for truth. But when stream entry occurs, the very structure that gives thoughts their authority is no longer believed in the same way. This change begins with direct insight into the nature of reality, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. The insight into non-self becomes more than an idea. It becomes an unshakable recognition. The view of a permanent, separate self is broken, not because it's denied, but because it's seen through. The thoughts that once circled around me now lose their center. The mind still moves, but it no longer clings to the movement. Overthinking collapses, not because thinking stops, but because identification with thinking weakens. There is a clear knowing. This is just thought, not mine, not truth, not personal. It arises and passes like everything else. This recognition removes the fuel. Thoughts may still arise out of habit, but they don't catch fire. They don't become obsession. They don't spiral into endless loops. The insight also weakens doubt. One of the core fetters broken at stream entry is skeptical doubt, not healthy inquiry, but the kind of inner spinning that leads nowhere. Doubt about the path, about one's own capacity, about what is real. When this is gone, the mind gains stability. It no longer searches for something to stand on. It knows where it stands. It trusts the unfolding of truth. Another fetter that falls away is attachment to fixed identity. The belief that there is a permanent self behind experience. This is subtle. It's not about thinking, I exist or I don't. It's about the underlying feeling of being a center around which everything orbits. When this view is dismantled, the mind stops returning to self-reference as a baseline. It stops building stories around my pain, my thoughts, my journey. There is still care, still commitment, but the tension around self collapses. This shift is not theoretical. It shows up in daily life. In moments of stress that once led to hours of rumination, now there is awareness, pause, release. In situations that once triggered identity defense, there is space to respond instead of react. The mind becomes more flexible, less threatened, less compulsive. The internal monologue becomes quieter, not because it's pushed down, but because it's no longer needed in the same way. The endless commentary that tried to protect the self loses its urgency when the self is no longer held so tightly. Thought becomes a tool, not a master, a servant of awareness, not its owner. Stream entry also brings a deep sense of direction. The path no longer feels uncertain. Practice becomes simpler, not because it requires less effort, but because there is no longer confusion about why it's being done. The energy that once went into doubt and over-analysis is now available for presence, for refinement, for compassion. This change doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't erase old patterns completely. It means they are seen in real time, and that seeing has power. Even when thoughts return, they don't stick in the same way. Even when fear arises, it's held in a larger space. The mind doesn't fall for its own stories as easily. It watches, allows, releases. This stability brings emotional balance. When overthinking fades, so does the emotional turbulence it creates. Joy is more accessible. Sadness is less overwhelming. There's more room for humor, for patience, for kindness, because the mind is no longer hijacked by its own narratives. Even perception shifts. What once felt solid and fixed now feels fluid. Situations are no longer viewed through the lens of self-interest. Relationships are less entangled with ego. There's more space to see others clearly, to respond with empathy, to let go of needing to be right. This freedom deepens with practice. Stream entry is the beginning, the insight that starts the unraveling. It sets the mind on an irreversible course. The current flows toward truth, toward peace, toward the end of suffering, not through avoidance, but through understanding. And even though the insight is personal, its effects ripple outward. A mind that no longer clings is a mind that harms less. A mind that doesn't over-identify is less defensive, less reactive. The changes are subtle at first, but they shape every interaction, every decision, every breath. This stage also brings clarity about the nature of craving. Another fetter, attachment to rituals as ends in themselves, also falls. Practice is no longer about doing it right to gain identity. It becomes about what is skillful, what brings freedom. Meditation shifts from performance to inquiry, from achievement to simplicity. This freedom from overthinking allows intuition to surface, not mystical knowing, but direct responsiveness. You begin to feel the next step without calculation. You know when to speak, when to wait, when to stay still. Because the mind isn't cluttered, the heart can speak. There's a deeper honesty too. Without constant thinking, you see what is true more easily. You admit when you don't know. You acknowledge when you're wrong. You listen without preparing a reply. Because the need to defend a self is no longer primary. As this freedom stabilizes, gratitude grows. Not just for pleasant experiences, but for the whole path, even for the suffering that led here. You stop resenting your struggle. You begin to see how it shaped your seeing, how it brought depth, how it helped you care more. And so the path continues. Not from lack, but from clarity. Not from fear, but from love. The mind may still have thoughts, but it is no longer trapped by them. The self may still appear, but it's seen for what it is, just another movement, just another process. Empty, changing, harmless when not clung to. This is the collapse of chronic overthinking, not in one dramatic moment, but in the quiet undoing of confusion, in the steady presence of insight, in the calm knowing that awareness does not need to be protected by thought, it only needs to be remembered. And from this place, everything begins to change. Thought no longer leads. Awareness leads. Silence is no longer empty. It is full of knowing, full of freedom, full of peace. You've just taken a journey through more than 3 hours of timeless Buddhist wisdom, a path that gently peeled back the layers of anxiety, overthinking, fear, and self-doubt. You didn't just listen. You slowed down, you saw, you remembered. From the stillness of the breath to the sharp clarity of the cemetery contemplations. From the grounding rhythm of mindful walking to the deep resonance of chanting. From learning how craving feeds the storm to seeing that the self you protect might never have been solid at all, this wasn't information. It was transformation. You learned how thought isn't the enemy, but clinging is. How silence can heal what thinking never could. How presence is not passive, but the most powerful act of compassion there is. You're not the same as when you started. Not because you added something new, but because you let go of what never belonged. The tools are here now, gentle, ancient, quietly powerful. The breath, the body, awareness, and the knowing that freedom doesn't arrive someday. It begins now, in this very moment, exactly as it is. If any part of this resonated with you, if even one phrase gave you space to breathe, share it in the comments below, not just for us, but for the next person who needs it. Sometimes a single insight left by a stranger is the thing that saves someone else. And if you want to keep walking this path of insight and calm together, subscribe to the channel. There's more to learn, more to unlearn, and more silence to rest in, together. Now take one breath, just one. Let it be enough, and carry that stillness with you.